Beneath the mountains, deserts and forgotten hills of the world lie tunnels and shafts where human ambition meets the unknown. In the depths of ancient mines, structures carved by hands long vanished hide mysteries that defy explanation, from crystal chambers that shimmer with lethal beauty to corridors where entire teams disappeared without a trace. Some shafts echo with sounds no miner should hear, while hidden inscriptions hint at civilizations older than recorded history. In this journey through the world's most enigmatic mining sites, we explore vanished ladders, haunted drifts and subterranean voids that challenge our understanding of time, labour and the very earth itself. Every cavern, every metallic glint, carries a story of wonder, danger and secrets that remain buried, waiting for those willing to descend into the silent shadowed depths. The 27 vanished of Benham, Kentucky. In the heart of Harlan County, where the Appalachian Mountains fold into one another like pages of forgotten scripture, the mining town of Benham clings to its hillsides with quiet resilience. Built in the early 20th century by the Wisconsin Steel Corporation, Benham was one of several company towns that dotted the coal-rich seams of southeastern Kentucky. Its houses, churches and schools were raised to serve a single purpose: to feed the mine that pulsed beneath it. Coal was its currency and its curse, and by the 1920s, the Benham No. 1 mine had already claimed dozens of lives to methane, collapse and disease. Yet what would come to haunt its legacy was not death in the usual sense, but disappearance, an event that would leave no bodies to bury and no answers to comfort those who waited. Records from local newspapers and company archives describe a routine winter shift. 27 men entered the mine before dawn, as they had done countless times before, descending through the timbered mouth beneath the ridge. They were experienced miners, Slavic immigrants, Appalachian locals, handful of black labourers recruited from Alabama, and they worked under a foreman named Eli Jennings, known for his discipline and fairness. The shift was scheduled to last 12 hours. At the surface, their lunch pails and coats were left hanging on hooks outside the entrance, as was the custom. Inside, the lamps flickered against wet rock walls as the miners moved deeper into the lower seam, a mile from the portal where the coal was richest. By early afternoon, the signal bell that connected the main shaft to the surface stopped ringing. The hoist operator waited for the next call, a routine signal indicating the next coal car was ready for lift, but none came. At first, the silence was shrugged off. Communication breakdowns were not unusual, and faulty wiring often disrupted the line. But when several hours passed with no word from below, the superintendent ordered a retrieval crew to descend. What they found was unnerving. The tunnel was silent, undisturbed and empty. Rescuers traced the route along the main gallery and through the auxiliary tunnels where the crew had been assigned. The miners' tools were still lined along the track, picks leaning against the wall, shovels half buried in piles of coal, and lanterns still burning faintly, their fuel barely touched. There were no signs of collapse, flooding or gas leak, nothing to suggest panic or flight. At one junction, the rescue team found a single overturned coal cart, its contents spilled across the track, and nearby, a set of boot prints that abruptly ended midway across a patch of fine dust. Beyond that point, the floor was perfectly smooth, as though untouched for years. Word spread quickly through the valley. Families gathered at the entrance, their faces lit by the glow of lanterns and the red eyes of the furnaces nearby. Company officials brought in additional rescue crews from neighbouring Lynch and Cumberland. The search expanded into the lower seams, exploring disused sections that had been sealed decades earlier. One of these old galleries was reopened in desperation, its timbers rotted, and the air was thick with decay. Deep within, the men reported hearing distant echoes, metallic clinks that seemed to answer their own footsteps, though no other team was working in that section. For 3 days, the search continued. Food and water were lowered, though there was no indication anyone was there to receive them. Canaries placed in cages along the tunnels showed normal breathing. There was no gas or poison in the air. Yet one unsettling discovery deepened the unease. In a sump near the lowest level, rescuers found an intact helmet bearing the initials EJ, believed to belong to foreman Eli Jennings. It lay beside a length of twisted cable whose insulation had been stripped away, exposing copper that showed signs of heat but no burn source nearby. The area around it was strangely warm to the touch, even though the rest of the tunnel remained cold. By the fourth day, the search was halted. Engineers insisted the shafts were stable and that the miners must have somehow reached a sealed drift and perished. But their bodies were never located. The company's final report, filed in early 1927, listed the cause as unknown structural event. Local papers phrased it differently, calling it a disappearance of 27 souls beneath the ridge. Compensation was paid to families, half wages, as if for men declared dead but not confirmed so, and new workers were brought in within months. What lingers about Benham's vanished miners is how the event seemed to ripple beyond the boundaries of the mine itself. In the weeks that followed, townspeople reported tremors that rattled windows but registered on no geological instruments. The local pastor claimed the church bell would ring on still nights without a hand touching the rope. A night watchman at the coal tipple swore he heard voices rising from the shaft during his rounds, speaking faintly in languages he couldn't place. When he leaned close to listen, the wind would die and the sound would stop. Decades later, when the Benham mine was decommissioned and converted into a museum, workers restoring the lower tunnels stumbled upon an unmarked side passage. Its timbers were different, older, carved with symbols rather than serial numbers, and it sloped deeper than the mapped levels. Instruments brought to measure air quality malfunctioned as soon as they were activated. The passage was sealed again, officially for safety reasons. No public record of it appears in the museum's archives. To this day, Benham's residents regard the mine as both monument and wound. Tour guides speak of its history with practiced reverence, but avoid questions about the lost shift. The memorial plaque lists the names of the 27 men beneath a simple phrase, "Gone to the deep." Visitors sometimes claim to hear footsteps echoing beyond the reinforced walls, slow and rhythmic, as if someone was still working the seam just out of sight. And on certain winter mornings, when the fog hangs low over the valley, a faint hum is said to rise from the sealed entrance, steady, pulsing, and measured, like the beat of pickaxes against distant stone. The screaming shafts of Borinage. Before silence settled over Borinage, the earth itself seemed alive with noise. The constant hammer of picks, the groan of carts pulled by sweating horses, and the rhythmic blasts that shook the ground formed a symphony of survival. It was a soundscape that defined life across the coal towns of southern Belgium, where men worked beneath their own homes, separated from daylight by nothing more than a thin crust of trembling stone. When the last mine closed, the noise did not fade into peace. It fell into something deeper, something that sounded too much like grief. For nearly 2 centuries, the Borinage was Belgium's beating industrial heart, its veins filled with coal and its lungs with dust. From the early 1800s, black seams ran beneath Mons, Wasmers and Paterages, attracting thousands who sought the promise of work. The land was carved by shafts that dropped hundreds of meters into the earth, forming a labyrinth where families laboured generation after generation. At its peak, over 100 pits tunnelled beneath the region, their entrances gaping between narrow streets and fields where no grass grew. The coal they unearthed powered Europe's engines, but its price was measured in lives, and the ground itself seemed to absorb each loss. Those who descended each morning carried no illusions about mercy. Gas explosions, cave-ins and floods were constants, accepted as the cost of feeding the world's growing hunger for energy. Men worked by the dim light of oil lamps, faces smeared in soot, lungs already failing from years of dust. Few reached old age. In the tunnels, silence was a luxury. The clatter of tools and the low mutter of voices kept fear at bay. Because when the noise stopped, everyone knew something had gone terribly wrong. Even after the flames died and the air cleared, something continued to move in the dark. In the aftermath of disasters, when rescue teams finally emerged with soot-blackened faces and empty stretchers, others swore they still heard the missing. Strange echoes drifted through the galleries, long, wavering cries that rose and fell like breath. The most infamous was after the catastrophe at Wasmes in 1879, when a methane blast killed dozens and trapped more in collapsed tunnels. Days later, workers swore that screams still echoed from the sealed shaft, growing louder when the wind blew across the mouth of the mine. Some believed it was only air forcing its way through stone. Others were not so sure. Survivors spoke of the shafts as if they were alive, able to remember, able to mourn. Oral histories collected in the mid-20th century preserved miners' accounts of hearing voices below ground long after their comrades had died. One recalled a faint song drifting through the rock. A miner's chant used to keep rhythm during digging. Though the pit had been abandoned for over a decade, the men who worked nearby refused to go down again. They said the mine was crying back, and nothing would silence it. Superstition soon filled the silence that logic could not explain. Families left offerings near sealed entrances. Bread, candles, or pieces of coal shaped into small crosses. Priests from Mons were called to bless the shafts after each disaster, though many refused after the 1934 catastrophe, when fire spread through the pit at Peturages and rescuers recovered bodies fused into black glass by the heat. From that year on, no local church agreed to hold masses near the old sites. Residents began to say that Borinage had been cursed by the earth itself, that every cry from below was the sound of debt unpaid. Even outsiders who came to observe the miners sensed something beyond hardship, a place where faith, death, and the earth blurred together. Among them was Vincent van Gogh, who lived in Borinage during the early 1880s. He described the miners as black ghosts emerging from the underworld, their faces hollowed by exhaustion, their clothes caked in soot and sweat. His letters mention the unearthly quiet that followed explosions, when whole families stood at the pit head, waiting for a sound that never came. Decades later, researchers studying industrial folklore found his words eerily consistent with miners' own testimonies. The mine was not just a workplace, but a realm that seemed to breathe and remember. When the mines closed, the noises did not stop. With shafts abandoned and entrances sealed, strange sounds began to echo through the old pits during storms. Locals spoke of hearing voices carried on gusts that swept through the slag heaps. Long, drawn-out wails that rose and fell like the moan of machinery. Scientists who studied the phenomenon attributed it to wind passing through old ventilation pipes, their lengths producing tones like flutes or sirens. But others who grew up in the mining towns refused such explanations. They said the air itself was haunted, that the cries were warnings from below, reminders of what had been buried but never forgotten. Now, when darkness covers the ruins, the wind drags the old sounds back through the hollow hills. The brick chimneys, cracked and half swallowed by moss, seem to hum when storms gather over Mons. The earth shudders with faint rhythmic pulses, as if the tunnels beneath are still breathing. Few venture near after nightfall, and those who do sometimes return shaken, claiming that if one stands still long enough, the whispers begin again, faint, distant, almost human. Some say the voices belong to the past, but others believe the Borinage still remembers who it took. The vanishing lights of Mount Isa. It began as a shimmer, a fleeting pulse that moved where no light should exist. Deep beneath the rock, where the air hangs heavy and the silence feels alive, a pale gleam would appear, drift, and vanish as though swallowed by the dark. Some said it resembled the glow of a miner's lamp seen from afar, yet no one was there to hold it. It hovered in shafts long sealed, gliding past junctions, flickering around corners, and dissolving before it could be reached. In a place where every glint of light once meant life, its appearance became an omen. Beneath the dry expanse of northwestern Queensland lies a city within stone, Mount Isa, one of the deepest mining labyrinths on Earth. Since the 1920s, its shafts and tunnels have produced vast amounts of copper, lead and zinc, carving an invisible metropolis below the Australian outback. The mine stretches for hundreds of kilometres, descending into heat and pressure where the air grows thick with metallic dust. Above ground, Mount Isa appears like any other industrial town, but below, generations of miners have spent their lives in a world few outsiders ever see. It is there in that constant dusk that the stories of the vanishing lights were first told. Reports of lights first appeared in maintenance logs, small notations that something was flickering where lamps had already failed. The earliest accounts came from the mid-20th century, when safety officers began recording unexplained reflections in sealed galleries. Crews sent to inspect found no faulty wiring, no loose lamps, and no metallic surfaces capable of reflecting light. At first, the reports were dismissed as fatigue, the tricks of eyes strained by darkness and dust. But when entire teams began to see it floating at the edges of their lamps, the explanations faltered. Science offered explanations, but each dissolved when tested against what the miners had seen. Some proposed that methane gas might ignite spontaneously, producing brief flashes. Others blamed reflections from distant lamps bouncing through quartz or pools of groundwater. Yet none of these theories accounted for how the light seemed to move deliberately, rising, pausing and retreating when approached. In one recorded case, a supervisor followed the glow for nearly 20 meters down a narrow drift before it slipped behind a wall of rock that had been sealed since the 1940s. When the area was reopened, it led to nothing but an empty cavity filled with collapsed debris. In the still air of the lower galleries, light behaves strangely. Temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, and the air hangs with fine particles that twist and shimmer when disturbed. Breathing becomes laborious. The heart beats louder than footsteps. Miners learn to trust their lamps above all else. A constant glow in the crushing dark. Yet those who have seen the wandering lights say it feels different. Softer, almost cold without the warm pulse of a flame. It glows with the colour of metal under moonlight, and it never casts a shadow. More than once, men followed the glow, thinking it came from another team. On several occasions, they reported hearing the faint rattle of chains or the scrape of boots against stone, as if someone moved just ahead. One account describes a pair of lights that seemed to drift together, rising slowly up a vertical shaft until they vanished near the surface. When rescuers searched the area, they found no one there, only the smell of ozone and dust. Such stories were whispered in the barracks, shared after shifts between those who swore they had seen the same thing, a moving light that led them deeper, then disappeared. Mount Isa's tunnels stretch for hundreds of kilometres, a world where isolation distorts both sound and sight. The further one descends, the more the senses warp. Distance and time blur into repetition. Many of the miners who reported the lights had spent decades underground. Their perception sharpened to every flicker and vibration. Yet their descriptions were too consistent to ignore. Supervisors began marking the locations where sightings occurred, noting patterns, abandoned levels, high-pressure zones, places where ancient rock folded and compressed. The lights, it seemed, favoured areas untouched by machinery, places where human presence was rare. By the 1960s, the stories had taken on a life of their own. New hires were warned not to chase strange lights, not to wander off into disused passages. Some called it superstition, others claimed it was a safety measure disguised as folklore. Yet the stories spread beyond the town. Engineers from other mines visited Mount Isa to study reports, intrigued by the idea that geological stress might release electromagnetic energy visible to the naked eye. Still, no one could reproduce the phenomenon above ground. Whatever the miners saw, it belonged solely to the depths. Later studies sought to measure the phenomenon, but the lights refused to behave. Instruments set up in suspected locations recorded minor temperature fluctuations and brief spikes in static charge, but nothing that could explain the luminous shapes described. Some researchers suggested piezoelectric effects, light produced when crystals in the rock are squeezed under immense pressure. Others believed trapped gases might create faint phosphorescence. Yet the miners maintained that what they saw was not random. It moved as if aware, lingering at the edge of vision, retreating when approached, waiting when ignored. Today, when the power cuts out and the tunnels fall into silence, some say they still see it, a glow that flickers once then fades into the rock. The mine today is safer, modernised, its depths mapped and monitored by sensors and machines. But even now, workers sometimes report seeing pale lights hovering in old crosscuts, long after the generators have been shut down. It appears briefly, like a breath drawn and held, before the darkness closes in again. Perhaps it was only light, or maybe it was something that learned to live where men were never meant to see. The abandoned helmets of the Lovett mine. Scattered across the lowest corridor of the Lovett mine lay a dozen helmets, their lamps long extinguished, their owners unaccounted for. Dust had settled thickly over their metal crowns, dulling the once bright insignias of the mining company that owned them. Rescue workers who first descended into that silent shaft described an atmosphere unlike any they had encountered, an emptiness so complete that sound seemed to dissolve before it could echo. The tools of labour were still in place, shovels, picks, and drills leaning against the walls, as if momentarily set aside. but no footprints led away and no bodies remained. Only the helmets, arranged in eerie symmetry, marked where men had stood before, vanishing from the depths. The Lovett mine had once thrived beneath the ridges of Schuylkill County, its tunnels cut deep into anthracite veins that fed Pennsylvania's roaring industry. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this region supplied coal to fuel entire cities, its subterranean networks extending for miles beneath the Appalachian foothills. The mine's records showed steady output, minimal safety violations, and a workforce hardened by generations of underground labour. Families built their lives around its shifts and wages, the rhythm of sirens and whistles dictating the tempo of each day. The community that grew above it, Lovett Township, depended entirely on the mine's fortune, unaware that its very foundation concealed a future legend of disappearance. Work records from the final shift showed nothing unusual. 27 men assigned to the Southern Drift, all experienced, all accounted for at the gate. The day's task was to expand the ventilation system deeper into the old seams where new deposits had been mapped. The foreman's notes, later recovered from his office desk, made no mention of gas buildup or unstable rock. Conditions by all accounts were ideal for the operation. Even the weather outside was steady without the storms that often triggered collapses or flooding in that region. Yet when the crew entered before dawn, none would ever emerge again. When the foreman's last signal failed to return through the comm line, it was dismissed at first as static, the kind that often haunted deep tunnels. Communication failures were common, caused by mineral interference or faulty wiring. The shift above continued their work through the morning, expecting the southern crew to surface by midday. But as hours passed and lamps never reappeared in the lift, unease spread among the surface hands. No sounds came through the pipes that usually carried the faint clang of tools or shouted orders. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed their noise whole. Hours later, when surface calls went unanswered, a rescue party descended into the same shaft, expecting gas, not absence. What they found defied protocol and reason alike. The rails along the cart lines were unbent, the timber supports intact. There were no signs of explosion, fire or flooding, but every trace of human presence ended abruptly at a narrow corridor less than a mile inside. The rescuers' lights revealed only those scattered helmets, their lamps turned off and positioned upright on the ground. Beneath each one, faint imprints in the dust suggested that men had once knelt there, but even those impressions faded the deeper they searched. Every lamp found within the drift had been turned off, and every helmet rested upright, as if placed deliberately upon the rock. Their arrangement formed a subtle arc, curving toward a collapsed ventilation tunnel that appeared undisturbed by fresh cave-in debris. Experts later remarked that if such a collapse had occurred, it would have left fractures, displaced stone and fine particulate coating the nearby surfaces, but none was observed. The helmets, in their stillness, seemed almost ritualistic, as though left behind with purpose. Photographs taken that day remain among the most unsettling in Pennsylvania's mining archives. The ghostly shapes of equipment frozen mid-shift, untouched by catastrophe yet stripped of their human operators. No evidence of collapse was recorded. Geological assessments later confirmed that the strata remained stable that day. Gas readings taken in the aftermath revealed nothing abnormal. No methane spikes, no carbon monoxide presence high enough to cause sudden asphyxiation. Even the ventilation fans, powered by surface engines, were still operational when the rescue teams arrived. The absence of physical explanation led investigators to search the nearby drainage passages and service shafts, fearing a hidden breach. Yet no alternate exit existed, and no footprints, animal or human, marked the dusted ground beyond the main drift. The crew had entered a corridor from which no trace ever emerged, and the earth had remained perfectly still around their passing. What filtered through the town afterward were whispers, miners claiming the earth had gone hollow, or that a hum had driven men to madness. Some spoke of vibrations that shook tools from racks on the day before the disappearance, though no tremor was recorded. Others said the men had struck an older shaft, a forgotten tunnel from an abandoned 19th century operation rumoured to have collapsed under supernatural warning. Local newspapers chronicled the event in cautious language, careful not to provoke panic among remaining workers. Yet privately, families of the lost miners reported strange occurrences, knocks on their walls at night, the faint smell of oil and dust drifting through closed windows, as though the mine itself was breathing beneath their homes. Among old archives, only one photograph remains, helmets aligned in a curve, their glass lenses catching the beam of a rescuer's light. The image was published briefly in a regional safety report before being withdrawn without explanation. Decades later, the negatives resurfaced in a private collection belonging to a retired engineer who claimed the photo had been misfiled under equipment recovery, not missing persons. Experts studying the picture noted an odd distortion in the background, a faint shimmer, almost like heat haze, though no heat source could have existed in the airless tunnel. To this day, the photograph remains one of the most debated pieces of evidence from the case. Those who still work the surrounding pits speak of the Lovett tunnels with quiet restraint, as if the air itself remembers what should have remained below. The shaft remains sealed under layers of concrete, not for safety but for fear that reopening it might disturb whatever silence took the men. Local miners leave their helmets on the ground before entering nearby shafts, a small unspoken tribute to those who vanished without leaving even a shadow behind. And deep beneath the ridges of Pennsylvania, the Lovett mine waits, its corridors unbroken, its air unbreathing, its secrets still intact. The copper faces of Chuquicamata. When the morning light fell against the northern wall of Chuquicamata, it revealed what the miners later called the copper faces. As the sun climbed higher, outlines emerged, cheekbones, hollow eyes, lips pressed into mute expressions that seemed neither carved nor accidental. The men stood silent before the wall, their dust masks pulled down, their faces mirroring the strange human forms glinting back at them from the rock. Some swore they saw veins of ore tracing through their figures like arteries frozen in mid-motion. Others insisted the faces shifted subtly under the changing light, as if the mountain itself remembered the countless hands that had struck its core. Few places on Earth convey scale the way this open pit does. 4 kilometers wide, nearly a kilometer deep, a man-made canyon carved by generations of relentless labor. Chuquicamata, in northern Chile's Atacama Desert, is the largest open-pit copper mine in the world, a place so vast that trucks appear as insects crawling along its spiraling roads. Founded in the early 20th century and expanded under US and Chilean ownership alike, it became the heart of Chile's mining economy and a symbol of both wealth and exploitation. The air here is so dry that machinery rusts without decaying, and bones found in the surrounding desert often lie unaltered for centuries. It is a landscape that holds memory too well, every mark, every scar, every whisper left behind by those who worked it. The first sightings were dismissed as pareidolia, tricks of exhaustion under the desert sun, yet the faces multiplied with each passing month. Survey crews returning to the same section of wall noted new outlines appearing where none had been before. Miners began giving them names, the sentinel, the widow, the child, though management forbade such talk, fearing superstition would spread. In an interview decades later, one retired operator recalled refusing to work near the northern wall after sundown. He claimed that in the fading light the faces seemed to reflect movement from unseen sources, as though the pit itself watched whoever entered its domain. Geologists sent to examine the phenomenon found the rock's surfaces smooth and metallic, oxidized into green and red tones that seemed disturbingly organic. They attributed the forms to oxidation of copper sulfide minerals interacting with moisture and desert wind, producing irregular surface textures that the human eye could mistake for facial features. Yet the arrangement of these shapes defied probability. Symmetrical, layered, almost sculptural in composition. Chemical analysis confirmed that the affected strata had been exposed for decades without alteration, suggesting the images had not eroded naturally. Even under magnification, the lines held their uncanny coherence, as though drawn by something patient and unseen within the earth. Long before the mine was mechanized, the Atacameno people believed copper to be the blood of the mountain gods, a mineral that remembered all who touched it. According to oral traditions recorded in nearby Calama, mining was once forbidden in sacred hills where spirits were said to sleep beneath copper-bearing stone. Archaeologists later discovered pre-Columbian mining tunnels near Chuquicamata, dating back more than 1,000 years, containing human remains stained green from prolonged contact with copper ore. These bodies, preserved by the desert's dryness, became early evidence of how deeply the region's people understood the mineral, not merely as a resource, but as something living. When heavy machinery replaced manual labour, the excavation deepened into zones where the air shimmered with heat and minerals clung to the lungs. Those who had lived in Chuquicamata's company housing were relocated to Kalama as the ground beneath their former homes was dug away. In the years following, engineers noted recurring equipment failures near certain walls, particularly the section where the faces were first reported. Drill sensors malfunctioned, electrical surges flared without cause, and several operators refused assignments after claiming to hear metallic ringing beneath the engines, rhythmic like the strike of unseen hammers. Among the archives of a company photographer named Ruiz, several glass negatives show walls that seem to bear half-formed human profiles before vanishing into shadow. Ruiz's photographs, taken for geological documentation, were stored in Santiago for decades before resurfacing in the 1980s. When restored, certain frames revealed faces too defined to dismiss as coincidence, brows, mouths, and deep eye sockets appearing mid-swing of excavation. Historians noted that Ruiz had captioned one image simply Los Hombres de Cobre, the Copper Men. Within months of their rediscovery, the negatives were withdrawn from public access, with officials citing chemical distortion. Yet those who had already seen them described something unmistakably deliberate in their formation, as if each stroke of excavation had revealed, not created, the images. As stories spread through the camps, miners began leaving offerings, coins, matches, bits of bread, beneath the faces, hoping for safe passage through their shifts. Some poured water onto the stone before beginning work, murmuring words remembered from their elders' tales about appeasing the mountain's breath. Accidents, though rare, often occurred near that same section of wall, fueling the belief that the copper was not indifferent to those who disturbed it. The rituals became a quiet necessity, tolerated by management so long as productivity remained unaffected. Over time, the offerings accumulated in small piles, eventually sealed under fresh layers of dust and ore, offerings to a wall that no longer reflected light but seemed to absorb it. After parts of Chuquicamata's town were abandoned due to contamination, the same patterns began to appear in the new extraction site at Ministro Hales, miles away. This time, workers noticed not faces but full silhouettes impressed in the copper veins, as though shadow and metal had fused. Scientists again attributed the shapes to oxidation and heat flow, but local miners saw continuity, a migration of memory from one pit to another. They spoke of the mine expanding like a living being, drawing faces from those who worked it and returning them to the walls. Today, some sections remain off-limits, officially for safety reasons, though many suspect a quieter motivation, the wish to let what the mountain reveals rest undisturbed. In the stillness of the Atacama, where even footprints remain for centuries, the mine continues to whisper its strange testimony in metal and dust. It is a place where light exposes more than it should, where human labour leaves impressions deeper than steel can measure, and where silence carries the weight of every strike that once echoed across the pit. And some believe the copper never stopped shaping faces, it merely waits for new ones to take their place in the stone. The shadow in the Freiberg tunnels. Voices travel strangely underground, bending through stone until it's unclear whether they belong to the living or the earth itself. In the tunnels beneath Freiberg, Germany, where silver once sustained an empire, the air carries a sound unlike any other, low, rhythmic, and measured, as if echoing the pace of footsteps that never quite fade. Those who have stood in these chambers describe the sensation of being watched, not by a presence above or behind, but by something that seems to exist within the walls themselves. Far below the quiet streets of Saxony's oldest mining town lies a labyrinth first carved by medieval hands. Freiberg's mines date back to the 12th century, their veins rich with argentite and galena, metals that fueled not only local wealth but the reach of the Holy Roman Empire. Over centuries, the tunnels expanded into a network stretching for more than 800 kilometers, an underground world so vast that, even today, its full extent remains uncertain. Yet among all its galleries, one section, the abandoned lower drift of the Reiche mine, has drawn more unease than any other. In 16th century records, mentions of the man who moves without a lamp appear without detail, as though the chroniclers feared giving shape to what they had heard. Miners were notoriously superstitious, and in Freiberg their beliefs merged with the deeper folklore of the Ore Mountains. They left offerings near fault lines and crossing tunnels, whispering prayers to avoid disturbing what they called der Schattenmann, the Shadow Man. It was said that those who mocked the ritual would see their reflection twist in the damp rock, stretching thin and long until it no longer resembled them at all. One of the earliest recorded incidents took place in 1719, when a team repairing a ventilation shaft reported seeing a figure pass through a sealed corridor. The foreman, a man named Johann Meisner, noted in his ledger that the figure held no lantern and no sound of foot upon gravel. Meisner dismissed it as exhaustion until his crew found that same corridor collapsed the next morning. The timber supports warped inward, as if crushed by pressure rather than time. From that day, the miners refused to descend without a priest's blessing, a tradition that continued long after the Enlightenment stripped most superstitions from Europe's scientific towns. As the centuries turned, Freiberg modernized, but its mines did not forget. During the 19th century, when industrial extraction replaced hand tools with steam drills, strange reports resurfaced. Workers claimed to see flickering silhouettes move independently of their own shadows, the outlines sharper than the candlelight could explain. Engineers blamed reflections from mineral veins. Galena, after all, is known for its metallic sheen. But when the phenomenon persisted in sections long stripped of ore, no explanation seemed sufficient. Geologists who later surveyed the tunnels noted their peculiar structure: tight, intersecting shafts forming geometric angles, where sound reverberates unpredictably. A whisper in one chamber could emerge several meters away as a distorted echo. Theories suggest these acoustics might explain the illusion of movement, as shifting light interacts with vibration and moisture. Yet even these logical answers struggle to account for the detailed accounts written by experienced miners, who swore the shadow did not mimic them, it followed. In the late 20th century, Freiberg's mining operations shifted toward education and preservation, transforming parts of the old network into the Reichssicher research mine, maintained by the Technical University of Bergakademie Freiberg. Students studying ore deposits and geophysics ventured where the older miners once worked, and soon their reports echoed those of the past. Cameras malfunctioned, tools disappeared, and in one case a mapping team described a tall, motionless figure reflected on the wet rock wall behind them, visible to the camera's thermal sensor but not to the human eye. The footage, later examined by engineers, showed a silhouette with a temperature several degrees cooler than its surroundings. Authorities attributed the anomaly to airflow and condensation, though the miners remained unconvinced. One veteran technician recalled hearing a metallic clang ring out in perfect rhythm with his steps, though he was working alone. He described the sensation as a mirror walking beside me. His account joined a growing list of unexplained experiences that researchers quietly set aside, wary of drawing ridicule in an academic environment that prized rationalism over folklore. Even now, the deeper sections of Freiberg remain closed to the public, sealed by reinforced gates to prevent collapse and contamination. Yet those who still work the surrounding galleries insist the sound persists, a hollow resonance that pulses faintly through the ventilation ducts at night. Measurements taken during seismic tests have occasionally recorded rhythmic fluctuations, with no identifiable source, a faint pattern that repeats every few hours before vanishing altogether. The miners of modern Freiberg do not speak openly about what they believe moves through their tunnels. They focus on their work, on calibrating sensors and maintaining supports, but they feel it nonetheless, the weight of unseen company. And when the air shifts and the sound returns, that same low rhythm once mistaken for footsteps, they pause, listening not for danger, but for recognition. They whisper that the mountain remembers every life it has taken, and sometimes it lets one of them walk again. The Forbidden Drift of Kimberley. Silence clings to the deepest reaches of the Kimberley mine, where even the sound of falling dust seems too loud for what was buried there. The big hole, once filled with the clang of picks and the hum of drills, now sits in stillness, a scar-turned museum. Yet far below the well-lit displays and safety barriers lies another world, one closed long before the mine's public redemption. It is known among workers and archivists by a name spoken with quiet reluctance, the Forbidden Drift. When Kimberley's first shafts were sunk into the arid earth of the Northern Cape, no one imagined the frenzy that would follow. By the late 1800s, tens of thousands of diggers had turned a quiet hill into a chasm more than 200 metres deep, driven by the promise of diamonds embedded in volcanic kimberlite. Under De Beers' control, the mine expanded into a labyrinth of descending tunnels, each marked with precise codes and maps. These drifts stretched into the blue ground beneath the city, chasing veins that shimmered under lamplight. It was a monument to human ambition and a graveyard for those whose labour made it possible. Each metre of descent demanded more than stone. It demanded silence, enforced by contract, by fear, and by the weight of the earth itself. Black and migrant miners, bound by harsh regulations, descended with little light and less safety. The tunnels were narrow, the air suffocating, and methane often pooled near the ceiling, invisible and lethal. Accidents were common. Reports of collapses or missing crews circulated briefly before vanishing into company archives. Yet among these tragedies, one stands apart: the sudden closure of an entire section whose name no longer appears on any official map. Among the maze of numbered galleries, one drift was never mapped in public records, its entry bricked and marked with a number that no longer corresponds to any registry. It extended below the 880-foot level, beyond the point where oxygen had to be pumped mechanically, and into the oldest veins of the volcanic pipe. The miners who worked there called it the Black Mouth, not for the darkness, but because the air itself seemed to move like breath. Rumour held that a collapse had sealed it in 1908, yet no list of casualties matches the number of men who disappeared that year. In the surviving logbooks, a single line stands out. Team 4 did not return before the bell. Nothing follows. The foreman's signature ends mid-stroke, and the next day's page begins with a different hand. Decades later, a former shift captain described seeing smoke rise from that section, despite no fire being reported. Others spoke of muffled vibrations beneath the floor, a steady pulse that tools could not account for. When officials sealed the drift, they did so in haste, leaving behind rails, trolleys, and even lamps still lit. No public statement was issued, and the miners were reassigned without explanation. When restoration crews returned to the lower workings decades later, they discovered a rusted iron door still bolted from within. The surrounding rock was discoloured, baked by heat or pressure that no natural fault could have produced. One of the engineers recorded in his notes that the air smelled faintly metallic, sharp like old coins. It was enough to turn their lamps blue. Within that heat and silence, the sense of being watched returned, a familiar unease to those who know the underground too well. They sealed the passage again, this time with concrete. Archived geological notes from Kimberley reveal that the big hole's lowest chambers broke into earlier, undocumented tunnels, passages that bore no relation to De Beers' blueprints. Their angles were too steep, their supports cut from an earlier unknown method of timbering. A metallurgical analysis of debris from that zone revealed traces of slag and fused quartz, suggesting exposure to temperatures far beyond what mining equipment could generate at the time. Some researchers speculated these remnants belonged to experimental blasting efforts, but no corresponding records survive in company files. The reports end abruptly, as if the investigation itself was halted mid-page. Behind that barrier lay a short corridor lined with abandoned helmets, each positioned upright, as if waiting for their owners to return. The walls around them were marked by streaks of soot and what appeared to be tool scratches, but the pattern did not match the rhythm of digging. It looked deliberate, almost written, as though someone had tried to carve words into the stone. Analysis of the marks yielded no translation. They resembled nothing from any recorded alphabet. A few helmets were dented inward, their interiors fused with crystallized residue that seemed to grow from within. Samples were taken, but the results were never published. The official explanation, gas pockets and instability, appears in every report, yet no record identifies who sealed the drift or why it was never reopened. Company spokesmen dismissed the section as unsafe, while independent researchers argued that certain strata near the lower kimberlite pipe contained chemical irregularities capable of generating heat and microfractures. But that alone could not explain the footprints preserved in the dust, 27 in total, all leading deeper into the wall where the tunnel ends. No corresponding prints returned. At present, when maintenance crews pass near the old drifts, the instruments sometimes flicker, registering pressure changes from corridors that no longer exist. The sensors pick up rhythmic tremors, too weak for seismic activity, too patterned for chance. Supervisors attribute it to air compression or the shifting of old timber, though the readings occur even in reinforced stone. On still nights, the vibration travels faintly through the ground above Kimberley, a low hum beneath the city's sleeping lights. It's said the drift was closed not by collapse, but by intention, and the reason was never written down. The Iron Whispers of Karuna. At a depth where light has no meaning, a low vibration hums through the iron walls like the pulse of a buried machine. It moves through the rock in long, drawn-out tremors that resonate against steel supports and the ribs of men alike. In the stillness between shifts, when even the ventilation rests, the sound lingers, a deep metallic murmur that seems to think before it fades. Those who have stood in the dark long enough say it feels alive, not as a sound one hears, but as something that moves through the bones, as if the mountain itself were whispering in a language no one was meant to understand. When the first shafts of Karuna were carved into the flank of Kirunavara, the air filled with the scent of magnetite and oil. Founded in the late 19th century, the mine would soon feed Europe's steel furnaces, its ore almost pure enough to glitter. LKAB, the company that oversaw it, became a name synonymous with precision and progress, a monument to Swedish engineering. By the early 1900s, rail lines connected Karuna to the port of Narvik, turning tundra into a corridor of wealth and industry. The mine grew deeper, its tunnels descending through iron-rich stone that had formed nearly 2 billion years before, until the line between geology and machinery blurred. With every metre of descent, the air thickens with the tang of rust and the echo of unseen machinery. The deeper levels stretch for miles beneath the Arctic ground, illuminated by the occasional flicker of sodium lamps. There is no sense of day or season there, only the rhythmic thrum of drills and conveyors, a pulse that has replaced the silence of ancient rock. The lowest galleries reach depths beyond 1,300 metres, where temperatures rise despite the cold world above. For many who work there, the sound of the mine becomes something more than mechanical, a steady reminder that they are trespassing in a place that was never meant to be hollowed out. It was during the late shifts, when the lifts had stopped and only the ventilation droned, that the whispers began. They came not as voices, but as coordinated tones, a metallic vibration that seemed to carry intention. Workers described it as a singing from the walls, soft at first, then gathering force until tools trembled in their hands. The sound never came when machinery ran, only when the mine was still, as if it needed silence to speak. Crews started refusing the deepest levels unless paired in twos, and men began leaving their helmets in the lift cages rather than risk the descent alone. The engineers blamed stress fractures, the geologists blamed resonance, but neither could explain why the patterns repeated like a human voice trying to form words. LKAB installed sensitive seismic monitors to capture the vibrations, yet what they found defied classification. The frequencies recorded between levels 1100 and 1365 followed rhythmic cycles not associated with fault movement. One report noted a periodicity inconsistent with mechanical failure, and yet no one dared suggest anything beyond natural causes. The official explanation cited thermal contraction of ore under pressure, but even that failed to explain the curious pauses, intervals of perfect silence that lasted precisely 8 seconds each time. Far below the active shafts lies an abandoned drift where the walls are slick with mineral sweat, and every sound returns distorted. These closed zones are marked only on internal maps, sealed after small collapses threatened the structure above. But those who work near the restricted drifts tell of a strange reverberation that grows stronger the closer one moves toward the sealed gates. The sound, they say, does not echo outward, it draws inward, as if being pulled into something deeper than the mine's physical boundary. Those gates are welded shut now, each one backed with steel and concrete, yet the low hum continues from behind them, faint but constant, a presence that feels aware of being contained. Above, the city itself is moving, buildings rolled across the snow like offerings to a restless earth. Since 2004, Karuna has been relocated piece by piece, its old streets and landmarks dismantled as the mine's expansion threatens to consume the ground beneath. Churches, homes and schools are carried eastward on massive sleds, their stained glass and beams preserved like relics. To the miners, the relocation feels like a slow surrender, a quiet admission that the mountain beneath is claiming what once rested on its back. Every few months, new sinkholes appear in the old quarter, perfectly circular and deep, as though the earth is inhaling. One surviving log from 1986 describes the sound as metal on metal, regular as a heartbeat, but deeper than any drill. The entry, signed only with initials, notes that the noise grew stronger near the end of the shift and stopped the moment the last cage ascended. Later that night, a section of the tunnel floor collapsed, revealing a void with no recorded cavity beneath. Samples of surrounding ore showed signs of extreme compression, as if the rock had momentarily liquefied and then resolidified. The event was never mentioned in LKAB's reports, but among the older miners, that year became a quiet reference, the one when the mountain breathed in. In the years that followed, the same hum continued to register on instruments, steady and unbroken, as if something still moved below. Modern sensors can now isolate their frequency between 12 and 15 Hz, arranged too low for human ears but still strong enough to make the chest tighten when standing close to certain walls. Researchers have suggested it may be caused by the deformation of magnetite crystals under immense stress, producing a piezoelectric effect. But even that doesn't explain the pattern's precision. The hum doesn't waver, it maintains its rhythm, like a signal searching for something to answer it. The deeper the mine reaches, the louder it grows, though no one can pinpoint its origin. In recent years, LKAB has accelerated production, carving further into the iron vein that stretches beneath Karuna, but some claim that every ton removed makes the sound stronger. Instruments fail more often near the lowest shafts, and ventilation ducts sometimes rattle without airflow. Yet to those who still descend, the noise no longer feels random. It feels patient, methodical, as if whatever lies within the mountain has learned to breathe in rhythm with the machines hollowing it out. At times, the mountain seems to breathe through its seams of iron, as though memory itself lingers in the stone. The missing shift at Broken Hill. The logbook for the night shift at Broken Hill ends without a signature. The final entry notes the time the cage descended and lists 8 names, each followed by a check mark. There is no return entry, no accident record, and no follow-up inspection. For a mine as meticulously documented as Broken Hill, where every movement underground was accounted for, such an omission was nearly impossible. Yet in the archives of New South Wales, that single page remains blank beneath the last name, as if the record itself hesitated to continue. In the early years of the 20th century, Broken Hill was less a town than a wound turned to profit. Its ridge of lead, silver and zinc fed the expanding empire of the Broken Hill Proprietary Company, later known as BHP, which carved the earth into a labyrinth of galleries and inclined shafts. It was an ecosystem of metal and men, precise and punishing, where each ton extracted was balanced against the weight of human endurance. Routine governed every descent, every bell, every breath taken beneath that iron ridge. Crews moved like clockwork, one ending, another beginning, the shift whistle rising from the pit head like a call to prayer. Down below, lamps were checked, rails greased, and air pumps inspected. Between tunnels, faint vibrations echoed through the rock as drills gnawed at ore seams that pulsed with heat and pressure. Safety procedures were simple but absolute. No one entered without a partner. No lift descended unlogged, no shaft left unsealed. And yet, on one unremarkable night, order dissolved into silence. When the sun rose on August 12th, the cage returned empty. The men who were meant to be lifted from the lower drift, level 14, west section, did not appear. The cage was sent again, this time carrying a foreman and 2 engineers, but when they reached the platform, they found no sign of life. A lunch pail sat open beside a crate of blasting caps, the coffee inside still warm enough to steam. The first rescuers found the site exactly as it had been left, except for the men. Shovels leaned where they'd been stood, helmets rested on their hooks, and a half-filled ore cart waited mid-track. There were no signs of collapse or flooding, no evidence of fire or gas. A faint residue coated the walls, iron-rich, flaky and magnetic, enough to disrupt compasses and lamps alike. When they turned to retreat, one of the rescuers reported hearing a steady hum, low and metallic, rising from the sealed end of the tunnel. Company memoranda described the cause as structural fatigue, though none of the surrounding rock bore the marks of failure. The correspondence between engineers and management, preserved in partial copies, shows a clear instruction to stabilise and close the affected section, with no further excavation. Local papers carried only a brief notice: incident at mine, operations delayed, and the shift's names never appeared on official casualty lists. Their families were compensated under a clause used for lost production days, not fatalities. The mine continued without pause, and the silence surrounding that night deepened. During a later phase of reinforcement, engineers reopened the lower galleries and found air as still as glass. The rock there had hardened to a metallic sheen, veined with iron oxide that shimmered under the lamps. One of the engineers recorded sound that repeated every 13 seconds, an echo perhaps, but one that grew louder the closer they approached the old barricade. When they withdrew, their magnetic compasses had reversed, pointing inward toward the wall instead of north. A metallurgist brought in from Sydney later noted that samples taken from the area showed unusual magnetite alignments, forming natural bands that acted like primitive circuits. When tested under current, the fragments emitted a faint vibration, a hum similar to the one reported by the crew. Though the phenomenon was dismissed as magnetostrictive resonance, the data was sealed within BHP's private archives and never published. Even now, the surviving core samples are missing from the university collections where they were said to have been sent for analysis. Rumours circulated among miners long after the official inquiry closed. Some spoke of an experiment, an attempt to use electrical current to map the ore body through resonance and sound waves. Others claimed the shift had been sent to install new cables for an upcoming test, one meant to measure magnetic permeability deep within the ore. If that were true, no such project was ever acknowledged. What remained was the drift itself, bricked over and omitted from subsequent maps, its existence preserved only in whispered recollection. The tremors returned decades later, faint but regular, measured by new seismic equipment during the modernisation of the mine. The sensors, calibrated to detect rock stress, recorded rhythmic pulses that originated from the Old West section, the same depth as the missing shift. Engineers attributed it to residual strain from old supports, yet the pattern's precision baffled them. Each vibration was perfectly timed, too consistent for a random fracture, too deliberate for chance. Those who worked nearby claimed to hear the faint metallic rhythm through their boots, a pulse that matched no machine they used. The section remains sealed even now, its location excluded from every safety map in circulation. Yet within the mining museum that now stands above the ridge, one artifact draws quiet curiosity: a single helmet, warped by heat and marked with a deep indentation, recovered from the 14th level decades after the disappearance. Its surface bears traces of iron fused with zinc, an alloy not known to occur naturally within the Broken Hill ore. Old miners whisper that the earth beneath Broken Hill never gave them back, it merely closed its mouth around their names. The flooded chamber of Potosi. Long before the tunnels of Potosi fell silent, they had already claimed more than silver. The mountain, Cerro Rico, rose above the city like a jagged sentinel, its veins coursing with lead, zinc, and the glitter of pure silver. Spanish colonists had tunnelled into its slopes with pick and pulley, exploiting indigenous labour under conditions so brutal that countless lives disappeared into the labyrinthine galleries. Centuries of extraction left scars both visible and hidden, layers of forgotten passageways beneath the city, some mapped, others lost to time, and a few never meant to be seen at all. What drew attention was not the lode itself, but a wall too deliberate to be natural. Miners working to reinforce a lower shaft in the mid-20th century noticed the stonework, set with precision, far beyond the rough masonry common to colonial tunnels. Its presence contradicted every record in the municipal archives. Drawings from the Spanish Viceroyalty show grids and cross-sections, yet this wall did not exist in any survey. Its masonry was older than modern cement, yet fresher than centuries of neglect would allow. It was as though the mountain had built it for reasons deliberately hidden from those who came after. When the wall gave way, the mountain exhaled a torrent of water darker than ore. The pressure was unexpected. The miners were nearly swept back by the sudden deluge, a violent surge that poured from cracks in the reinforced masonry. Once the water subsided, it left behind a deep chamber filled with an eerie stillness. The surface glistened with residual mercury, and metal tools from previous explorations lay half submerged. Despite the flooding, the chamber itself bore signs of human attention: smooth floors, carved channels, and markings that hinted at a careful purpose beyond mere extraction. Records from the Viceroyalty period speak of a level that was surveyed but never mined. In an engineer's journal from 1732, a shaft described as La Camara Prohibida was noted only once, with warnings that the tunnels ran into subterranean watercourses too dangerous for men. No further details were recorded. The entry was terse, almost clinical, yet the language suggested a mixture of reverence and fear. For centuries, any mention of the chamber vanished from maps, censored or forgotten, leaving its existence as a shadow in the historical record. Once the flood receded, the chamber revealed an architecture both ancient and unfamiliar. The walls bore vertical grooves, not the result of pickaxes but of tools with a uniform rhythm, suggesting an unknown technique. Calcite veils hung from the ceiling in delicate sheets, as if nature had attempted to replicate a ceremonial canopy. Mercury traces remained along the floor, unusually concentrated and chemically active, leaving a faint sheen that reflected the miners' lamps in spectral green. Even the air itself smelled of metal and damp earth, tangy and oppressive, pressing on the lungs in a way that made every movement deliberate. Among the miners of Cerro Rico, there is a saying that the deeper one digs, the more the mountain remembers. Stories circulated of workers encountering sudden temperature drops, disorienting echoes, and voices that seemed to answer questions no one had asked. Some claimed to see shadows moving against the walls, only to vanish when approached. Older miners refused to descend into the lower tunnels alone, whispering that the spirits of those who died in the earliest extractions lingered, guarding the chambers where human ambition had pushed too far. Subsequent studies tried to frame the phenomenon within geology, but the evidence refused to comply. Hydrogeologists proposed that a natural aquifer might have ruptured, yet the symmetry of the chamber and the reinforced wall contradicted this theory. Chemists noted mercury and silver residues far exceeding known concentrations in surrounding ore, suggesting some human manipulation, though no records described its purpose. Even with modern instruments, the pressure readings and magnetic anomalies within the chamber did not match any logical explanation. It was a structure caught between natural formation and deliberate construction. Weeks after the draining, another crew entered to stabilize the site and did not return. Equipment left behind bore unusual signs: corroded handles, warped rails, and lamps extinguished as if by a sudden gust, though the air was motionless. No sound of struggle was ever reported, and attempts to locate the men failed. The authorities sealed the entrance once more, leaving a reinforced steel barrier that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their disappearance only deepened the aura surrounding the chamber, transforming the site from an engineering curiosity into a place of whispered fear. Access to the lower passages is now forbidden, sealed beneath welded steel and official caution. Contemporary miners speak of strange electrical interference when passing near the site, instruments malfunctioning and patterns too consistent to dismiss. Despite surveillance and security, subtle tremors sometimes propagate through adjacent shafts, registering as rhythmic pulses beneath the mountain. They are faint enough to be ignored by most, yet persistent enough to haunt those who study Cerro Rico, hinting at activity in a space no one is allowed to enter. Deep within Cerro Rico's uncharted veins, where the air grows heavy with silence, something endures beyond record or reason. The chamber remains, waterlogged and untouched, a fragment of a mountain's memory that defies the chronology of human occupation. Its walls carry traces of labourers lost to time, its floor preserves the chemistry of experiments never recorded, and its atmosphere presses against the notion that any excavation can ever truly master the mountain. Somewhere inside that mountain there remains a room no one dares to measure twice. The burning mines of Centralia. Before smoke and ash claimed its streets, Centralia thrived on the black veins beneath its soil. The small Pennsylvania town had grown around a labyrinth of coal seams that stretched beneath homes, businesses and sidewalks, binding the community to the energy buried underground. Generations of miners had tunneled into these seams, leaving behind intricate networks of shafts, drifts and chambers. Coal dust hung in the air long after the day's work ended, a constant reminder of the industry that sustained the town and the latent dangers that slept beneath the streets. What began as a routine burn in a town landfill quickly turned into a subterranean inferno. In the spring of 1962, local authorities set fire to a strip of refuse in an abandoned strip mine pit. The blaze, meant to dispose of trash efficiently, crept silently through fissures in the overlying soil and eventually ignited a neglected coal seam. Its movement was imperceptible at first, hidden under layers of dirt and debris, yet it spread relentlessly, feeding on centuries of carbon-rich deposits. By the time miners noticed the acrid smoke seeping from unexpected cracks in the ground, the fire had already burrowed deep into the veins beneath the town. As flames moved through forgotten tunnels, the earth itself seemed to breathe smoke. Sidewalks cracked with sudden heat, and the ground heaved subtly underfoot. Steam and gases emerged from chimneys and abandoned cellars, carrying with them the unmistakable smell of sulphur and burning coal. Even in areas thought disconnected from the fire, residents reported sudden temperature spikes and smoke drifting from cracks in streets and yards. The underground network functioned as both conduit and prison, channeling the fire through a maze humans could neither map nor fully understand. Within months, workers vanished without a trace, leaving equipment abandoned in corridors too hot to enter. Maintenance crews and trespassers alike described hallways where the air became thick with choking gases, forcing retreat. Drills and lamps lay scattered as though their operators had been pulled away by invisible hands. Some of these disappearances were documented in local newspapers, often dismissed as accidents or voluntary disappearances, yet patterns emerged. Every incident clustered around sections of the mine that had remained uncharted for decades, corridors the town had forgotten. Sensors recorded temperatures and gas levels beyond known tolerances, as if the mine defied measurement itself. Engineers attempting to track the fire encountered readings that fluctuated wildly within feet, impossible for standard models of underground combustion. Methane pockets ignited spontaneously, only to be extinguished moments later, leaving walls scorched without explanation. The coal seams contained chemical variations that allowed the fire to smoulder in certain spots, yet instruments sometimes recorded heat in areas devoid of coal entirely. The mine seemed to obey laws known to neither human science nor engineering. For generations, locals whispered that the mountain beneath them had a memory, and it did not forgive. Stories persisted of miners hearing footsteps echoing through empty corridors, voices that answered questions never spoken aloud, and lamps flickering without wind or draft. Children dared not stray near cracks in the ground, and elders warned that the earth beneath Centralia was alive in a way the living could not comprehend. Some claimed that those who vanished were absorbed into the fire itself, carried along hidden passages where the seams converged into something older than any documented excavation. Engineers tried to drown the fire, to starve it of oxygen, but the coal seams seemed endless. Efforts to seal shafts with concrete, inject inert gases, and excavate containment zones failed repeatedly. Each time a section cooled, new fissures opened elsewhere, releasing smoke and heat in unpredictable locations. Plans to map the subterranean blaze accurately were thwarted by sudden collapses and lethal pockets of carbon monoxide. It was as though the mine had a will of its own, pushing back against attempts at control. Recent surveys revealed unexpected activity in sectors thought dormant, where heat and tremors appeared without cause. Modern monitoring detected weak electrical anomalies, rhythmic pulses in the earth, and gas concentrations that defied calculation. Roads above these areas would occasionally buckle, forcing temporary closures, and streetlights flickered as though responding to currents from below. Even the most precise instruments could not determine the exact source of these disturbances, leaving engineers and geologists to wonder whether the mine had evolved beyond the bounds of human comprehension. Houses were left to crumble, streets fell silent, yet the fire persisted beneath, hidden from view. Families relocated, schools closed, and a sense of absence settled over the town. Nature began reclaiming the streets, grass sprouting through cracked asphalt, vines creeping over abandoned buildings. The surface quiet belied the chaos below, where the fire continued its relentless advance, reshaping the tunnels and leaving areas of heat and instability that could swallow anyone who ventured too close. Through the layers beneath the abandoned streets, the fire continues its course, preserving mysteries no human hand can touch. No map can reveal the exact path it follows, and no record exists of the seams it has consumed. Centuries of mining, engineering, and human intervention have failed to quell it, and the subterranean blaze moves as if guided by some hidden architecture within the mountain itself, carrying with it the echoes of lost workers, abandoned tools, and chemical traces that tell stories no historian can fully decipher. Its flames move silently through the veins of Centralia, guarding secrets that may never emerge. The Phantom Tunnel of Cornwall. Cornwall's hills are riddled with tunnels carved by hands that knew the mountain as intimately as the tides of its coastline. Miners who laboured here over centuries created a network of shafts and drifts that twisted and plunged beneath the rugged landscape, guided by instinct, experience, and the subtle shimmer of mineral veins. Each excavation demanded precision and endurance, for the earth could betray the unwary in a heartbeat. Water seeped unexpectedly, rock fractured without warning, and pockets of noxious gas hid in corners unmarked by maps. These corridors were not merely conduits for ore, they were repositories of human endeavour, suffering, and secrets that refused to surface. Among the mapped galleries, whispers persisted of shafts that no record claimed, leading into the unknown. Old miners spoke of driftways that appeared and vanished, corridors discovered only when picks struck solid walls that should not exist. Surveyors sometimes noted inconsistencies in depth and direction, or walls where tunnels were supposedly absent. Such anomalies gave rise to the notion of a phantom tunnel, a hidden artery within Cornwall's intricate underground, immune to official documentation and resistant to repeated investigation. A survey team checking stability near the Great Flat Lode found a corridor hidden behind a bricked wall. The wall bore no sign of damage, yet a faint draught seeped through the seams, carrying the sharp scent of tin and copper. Upon removal of the bricks, the miners discovered a passage unlike any previously mapped. It bent sharply, defying the regular angles of engineered shafts, and its floor descended more steeply than expected. Old timbers, blackened with age, supported the roof in places where the rock should have collapsed centuries ago. The team hesitated, aware that they had uncovered something outside both memory and record. The passage curved in impossible angles, the walls rich with copper and tin deposits, yet the rock seemed unnaturally smooth in places. Veins glimmered under torchlight, some resembling crystal more than metal ore, catching the eye with patterns that resembled letters or symbols. The air was heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang, and occasionally a gust would stir dust that had lain untouched for decades. It was as if the tunnel preserved a different temporal rhythm, one that defied standard measurement, leaving those who entered uneasy, sensing an intelligence in the stone itself. Occasional pockets of natural arsenic crystals shimmer faintly under light, creating an otherworldly glow that has puzzled geologists for decades. Ancient logbooks reference a deep drift where crews never returned, though no official collapse was recorded. Names of men are crossed out with no explanation, their absences noted in passing but never fully documented. Letters sent to families went unanswered, archived silently alongside payroll records and daily reports. The tunnel may have been known to only a handful of engineers and foremen, hidden deliberately perhaps to protect valuable ore or to obscure the consequences of miscalculation. The gaps in the record suggest that history itself may have avoided fully acknowledging what occurred within its walls. Fragments of old miners' tools, corroded yet preserved in dry pockets of the tunnel, suggest work continued here long after official maps declared it abandoned. Inside, tools would rattle without wind and footsteps echoed from corners that led nowhere. Miners reported hearing shouts, hammers striking rock, or the low rumble of carts moving along tracks long since removed. Sometimes these sounds coincided with tremors above ground, small fissures opening in otherwise stable terrain. Instruments installed during later surveys registered fleeting electromagnetic disturbances, as if some fragment of past activity remained trapped within the mountain. Such anomalies fueled the belief that the tunnel retained echoes of human presence long after its abandonment. Geologists and spelunkers mapped as far as safety allowed, yet instruments frequently failed in concentrated areas. Thermometers spiked without cause, and gas detectors registered fleeting pockets of methane and carbon dioxide, often in places where seams had already been mined or sealed. Attempts to model airflow and temperature distribution proved inconsistent, confounding even experienced engineers. Explorers noted narrow alcoves branching off from the main corridor, some too low or steep to navigate safely, vanishing into darkness that no light could fully penetrate. Villagers spoke of the drift as haunted, a place where miners' spirits lingered alongside the mountain's secrets. Stories persisted of lamps swinging despite still air, shadows moving independently of observers, and whispers echoing off walls. One account described a miner who entered the corridor with a team but emerged alone, disoriented, and unable to recall the path he'd taken. Such tales became part of local lore, reinforcing the sense that the tunnel existed at the intersection of reality and imagination, where the boundaries of human perception blurred. Currently, the entry is sealed with reinforced timber, under watch for tremors and gas levels that defy prediction. Safety protocols prevent casual access, though researchers continue to study the surrounding geology. Seismic equipment, gas detectors, and ground-penetrating radar hint at voids and passages beyond the visible limits of exploration. Even without direct entry, the tunnel asserts its presence through subtle movements, changes in air pressure, and sporadic readings that suggest an enduring subterranean mystery. The tunnel stands as a reminder that even the most meticulously mined mountain can conceal corridors that history and reason cannot explain. Its existence challenges assumptions about mining precision, geological predictability, and the reliability of historical documentation. The combination of lost labour, anomalous construction, and inexplicable phenomena leaves a lingering unease, prompting those who study Cornwall's subterranean veins to wonder whether other hidden passages await discovery, impervious to maps and memory alike. Amidst the quiet rise and fall of Cornwall's hills, a corridor conceals stories no map has ever shown. The vanished dig of Vorkuta. The frozen plains of Vorkuta stretch endlessly, concealing beneath their icy crust a labyrinth of coal tunnels carved under the weight of both earth and regime. Snowdrifts accumulate for months, covering the small town and the scattered shacks of miners with a relentless silence that echoes the emptiness within the mines themselves. Above ground, the horizon is a uniform grey, broken only by the skeletal outlines of hoists and conveyors, but it is the darkness below that harbours the true danger. These subterranean passages extend for miles beneath permafrost and rock, winding unpredictably through coal seams that shimmer faintly when struck by light. The scale of the enterprise is staggering. Thousands of miners laboured in shifts, descending into depths where sunlight never reaches and temperatures drop to lethal extremes without mechanical intervention. Men and women descended into darkness for 12-hour shifts, their lungs filled with coal dust and the cold pressing in from every wall. Clothing froze stiff against skin, and the faint breath of warmth from a fellow worker became a rare comfort. The air is thick with the acrid tang of coal and the faint metallic trace of iron veins hidden in the walls. Miners relied on memory and intuition as much as maps, for the drifts twist and intersect unpredictably, and ventilation shafts sometimes vanish, or redirect airflow into dead ends. In such conditions, a minor error can become fatal, yet the pressure to meet quotas left little room for caution. Supervisors moved through these tunnels with a mixture of authority and fear, knowing that each shift could produce either profit or tragedy. In the summer of 1957, a team assigned to the 12th drift simply did not return, leaving behind lamps still burning and equipment untouched. The shift consisted of 25 men, seasoned miners with years of experience navigating the Arctic underground. When morning came and the team failed to report, an uneasy silence settled over the base camp, broken only by the clatter of boots on icy platforms. Initial communications suggested a minor delay, yet as hours passed, reports of the missing crew escalated into frantic concern. By the afternoon, management ordered a search, though detailed instructions were scarce. The state tightly controlled information, even within the mining network. The drift descended beneath permafrost layers, twisting through seams that occasionally emitted strange harmonic tremors detectable only by sensitive instruments. Sections of the passage were reinforced with timber and steel, but gaps in construction hinted at hasty work or perhaps areas mined in secrecy. The walls bore streaks of minerals uncommon in the region, including veins of wolframite and arsenopyrite, their sharp crystalline forms catching what little light penetrated the shaft. Occasional pockets of natural arsenic crystals shimmered faintly under lamps, creating an otherworldly glow that had puzzled geologists for decades. Water seeped in from cracks, pooling in corners where miners had left footprints that remained pressed into sediment for decades. Colleagues recalled muffled voices echoing where no one stood, and sudden bursts of wind that extinguished lamps in sealed corridors. Some reported hearing the distant sound of machinery or metal scraping against stone, though no equipment remained in those sections. Shifts preceding the disappearance noted subtle changes in air pressure and faint, rhythmic vibrations beneath their feet, phenomena dismissed by engineers as natural anomalies. Yet the miners felt a presence, a tension that could not be quantified, as though the drift itself had awareness. Journal entries describe unease so profound that even the most seasoned workers hesitated at junctions where the tunnels converged. Search teams combed the labyrinth for days, but their progress was slowed by unstable tunnels and inexplicable shifts in the mine's structure. Portions of the drift had collapsed spontaneously, cutting off access to corridors that may have held vital clues. Rescue efforts included drilling shafts for ventilation and deploying ropes and hoists to bypass fallen timber, yet the team encountered dead ends and passages that appeared to have no connection to mapped routes. In some cases, instruments indicated open space beyond walls, only for crews to strike solid rock when probing. Each day brought both frustration and mounting dread, as the Arctic cold made prolonged work nearly impossible and the mine seemed increasingly unwilling to reveal its secrets. Methane concentrations and hidden water channels complicated the terrain, creating conditions where entire sections could vanish beneath subsidence or flood in moments. Unstable permafrost contributed to shifting tunnels, while ice formations occasionally sealed narrow corridors with sudden force. Geophysical readings captured temperature fluctuations and air currents inconsistent with natural ventilation, raising concerns that unseen pockets of gas or water could engulf any intruder without warning. Miners' lamps flickered inexplicably, and handheld detectors recorded spikes in electromagnetic activity, suggesting anomalies that could not be explained by machinery or natural causes. Official records minimized the event, reducing it to a brief note in a ledger, while locals whispered of unspoken disappearances across the northern mines. The missing crew became part of an unspoken narrative, their fate alluded to in hushed tones, but never fully acknowledged. Older miners spoke of corridors that seemed to vanish behind them, as if the mine could rearrange itself, swallowing those who ventured too far. The secrecy surrounding Vorkuta during the Soviet era ensured that little could be investigated openly, leaving only fragments of eyewitness accounts and partial logs to hint at what transpired. Present-day engineers mapping the 12th drift report faint rhythmic vibrations and pockets of heat inconsistent with coal combustion or machinery. Sensors detect brief, unexplained fluctuations in air pressure, and small tremors ripple through walls thought to be solid. Samples of sediment reveal chemical residues that do not correspond to surrounding strata, suggesting either contamination or phenomena not yet understood. The drift remains uncharted in certain sections, its depth and length uncertain, a void in both geography and memory. Occasional discoveries of abandoned tools, corroded yet preserved in dry pockets, suggest work may have continued unnoticed long after official oversight ceased. The vanished dig of Vorkuta remains a frozen riddle where ice, coal and silence guard the fate of those who never emerged. The deep cry of Mojiang. Nestled among Yunnan's misted hills, the Mojiang mines snake through the earth like veins of black and red, feeding both economy and rumour. From a distance, the landscape seems serene, with terraced fields and thick bamboo groves casting shifting shadows across the mountainsides. Yet hidden below are a labyrinth of coal and copper tunnels, some hand-hewn centuries ago, that have swallowed both labour and life in ways the local population rarely discusses openly. The terrain itself works against any casual exploration. Unstable rock, hidden sinkholes, and sudden floods make even the most familiar passages treacherous. The hill's mineral wealth drew countless workers, yet the deeper one descends, the more the mine asserts its secrets, blending natural peril with a haunting sense of consciousness that has unsettled generations of miners. Centuries of digging have hollowed the hills, hand-hewn tunnels intersecting with veins of coal and copper, each echoing the toil of miners long gone. early extraction relied on rudimentary tools, pickaxes, chisels, and wooden supports, forcing labourers to navigate narrow galleries with only oil lamps for guidance. The practice was brutal, with accidents common and survival dependent on both experience and instinct. Over the decades, state-run operations modernised some areas, installing mechanised lifts, ventilation shafts, and reinforced supports. Still, the older drifts remain largely untouched, a patchwork of stone, timber and earth, where the echoes of past toil linger like invisible spirits. Each tunnel carries the memory of countless shifts, the collective strain of hands and lungs pressed against unforgiving rock. Within certain drifts, miners speak of a deep, resonant cry, rising from tunnels where no wind passes and no machinery operates. The sound is described as a low, mournful vibration that seems to emanate from the very stone, swelling and fading in irregular intervals. It can reverberate for hundreds of meters, making it difficult to trace to a single source. Some say it grows louder when the humidity is high, or after heavy rain saturates the surrounding earth. Miners report that attempts to locate the origin often fail. As they approach, the sound shifts, echoing into passages that appear empty. This phenomenon has earned the tunnels the moniker the Deep Cry, a name whispered in corridors and over meals, never in official records. In the 1980s, a small team vanished from Drift 7, leaving tools and lanterns behind, as though swallowed by the rock itself. The shift consisted of 6 miners, all experienced and familiar with the layout, yet they never returned from a routine survey. Initial reports were sparse and delayed, as communication with the drift relied on a series of pulleys and messengers who navigated the cramped tunnels. By the time supervisors descended to investigate, the men were gone. Their lanterns were still lit, their picks resting against walls, and footprints led only, into a corner where the rock seemed undisturbed. Official records note the disappearance with a single line, offering no explanation or follow-up, leaving the families and colleagues to fill in the silence with rumour and fear. Watercourses running under limestone layers create hidden caverns and sudden floods, their echoes amplified into haunting wails by the tunnel's unique acoustics. Underground rivers occasionally carve unexpected channels through the seams, creating cavities whose size and shape are unknown until collapse or seepage occurs. Seasonal rains accelerate this process, occasionally flooding galleries without warning and altering the acoustics in ways that can turn a normal drip of water into a sound resembling distant shouting. Miners have sometimes reported sudden cold drafts or warm gusts moving against the intended airflow, as if the mine itself were breathing and capable of shaping its own environment. Geological surveys confirm the presence of subterranean pockets and fault lines that make the tunnels inherently unpredictable. Locals speak of the tunnels as sentient, mourning the souls of those who laboured too long, a belief reinforced by decades of whispered warnings. Elders recall tales of workers hearing footsteps when none were present, or shadows moving along walls that should be empty. Children are warned not to wander near certain shafts, and festivals occasionally include offerings to placate spirits said to dwell below. Folklore attributes the deep cry to the echoes of miners lost long ago, trapped in passages that defy logic and time. While scientists may attribute these stories to acoustic anomalies or fear, the consistency and specificity of local accounts suggest a deep-rooted cultural recognition of the mine's unpredictability and power. Sensors installed in abandoned sections detect rhythmic pulses and subsonic vibrations, patterns that mirror the cries described by those who once worked there. Recent monitoring efforts deployed in sealed drifts have picked up temperature spikes, minute shifts in the rock, and faint electromagnetic disturbances. Instruments register these occurrences without correlation to known geological activity, and technicians report subtle pressure changes that can unsettle equipment and personnel alike. Even the air chemistry shows unusual concentrations of methane and trace minerals in unexpected locations, hinting at processes either overlooked or unique to Mojiang's underground environment. The persistence of these anomalies strengthens the enigma surrounding the deep cry and its potential sources. Exploration teams entering the older drifts found collapsed passageways, sediment-choked shafts, and lamps still burning untouched for decades. Surveying these sections is perilous. Ceilings can give way without warning, and sudden water pockets threaten to trap anyone below. In some areas, tool marks and footprints appear in patterns inconsistent with normal mining activity, leading investigators to speculate about movements of unknown origin. Some corridors seem to terminate abruptly, only for further examination to reveal side tunnels curving unpredictably, as if designed to confuse or mislead those who attempt to navigate them. Each expedition confirms that Mojiang's labyrinth is as much a psychological challenge as a physical one, testing the limits of human endurance and comprehension. The deep cry remains a riddle where human ambition meets geological secrecy, a sound that may be natural or something beyond comprehension. The combination of subterranean acoustics, hidden waterways, chemical anomalies, and historical disappearances creates a mosaic of mystery that refuses resolution. Every generation of miners adds new anecdotes, some mundane, some inexplicably strange, ensuring that the tunnels maintain their reputation as a place both productive and terrifying. Even as modern mapping and monitoring extend the known boundaries of the mine, certain galleries remain uncharted, their dark corridors untouched and unrecorded, leaving the full extent of Mojiang's secrets unknown. Within Mojiang's hills, the tunnels remember every footstep, every scream, and perhaps every soul, echoing endlessly in the dark. The Lost Blueprint of Rosia Montana. In the mountains of western Romania, where mist drifts low over forests and the soil gleams faintly with gold dust, lies one of the oldest mining sites on Earth. Rosia Montana, once known to the Romans as Alburnus Major, has been carved, tunneled, and hollowed since before written history. Beneath its quiet valleys stretches a labyrinth of shafts and galleries, so vast that no modern survey has managed to chart its full extent. Among these ancient passages, archaeologists uncovered tunnels lined with stone fused by heat so intense it could melt granite, yet with no sign of fire or blast. Excavations in the 1970s revealed miles of Roman-era workings preserved beneath layers of collapse. Many tunnels bore Latin inscriptions and mining marks typical of the 2nd century, when Rome's engineers drew gold from these hills to fund their empire's frontiers. But interlaced with those familiar galleries were others of a different kind, perfectly circular shafts that descended at angles unknown to Roman engineering, their walls smooth as glass. Samples taken from those surfaces showed crystalline structures consistent with stone subjected to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, far beyond what ancient forges could produce underground. At first, researchers attributed the phenomenon to volcanic activity, yet no evidence of magma flow exists anywhere near the site, and the Carpathian geology does not account for the narrow, localized melt patterns found deep below. Instruments brought to record temperature and humidity often failed, their batteries draining within hours. The Rosia Montana galleries were first mapped by Austrian engineers during the 18th century, when the Habsburgs reopened the mines for imperial extraction. Their surviving blueprints, drawn in sepia ink, detail a network of shafts reaching hundreds of meters down. But in several places, the drawings show clean breaks, lines that end abruptly with the notation perditum, Latin for lost. Modern scans using ground-penetrating radar later revealed voids beyond those limits, some vast enough to fit small buildings. Attempts to reach them ended when drills struck an unyielding surface, fused and solid as if the mountain itself had been sealed from within. Among the most puzzling finds were tools petrified in place. Bronze picks and chisels were discovered encased in rock that had partially melted around them, their edges sharp, handles intact. No soot, ash, or burn residue accompanied the melted sections, and there were no signs of cave-ins or fires that could have generated such concentrated energy. It was as if the stone had softened and flowed around the tools, then cooled instantly. Local legends long before archaeology arrived had already spoken of the fire that sleeps beneath. Villagers said that miners who dug too deep would uncover tunnels that shone faintly even in darkness. When the Austrians re-entered the mines, they recorded hearing distant mechanical sounds, rhythmic and metallic, echoing from sealed drifts. Some reports described these noises continuing for minutes after all activity above ground had ceased. In later decades, when Romanian geologists conducted seismic tests, unexplained vibrations were detected far below the last surveyed chamber, pulses that repeated in regular intervals but did not match any known drilling or natural movement. Artifacts from the site complicate the mystery further. Tablets inscribed with wax and wooden styluses found within the Roman layers list work quotas, transactions, and the names of mining overseers. Yet several tablets mention Templum Submontem, or the temple beneath the mountain, followed by notations scholars have been unable to translate. Some believe the phrase refers to a ritual space used by workers seeking protection from accidents. Others argue it might have described an existing structure the miners encountered, one too strange to classify within their world. Whatever its meaning, the phrase vanished from all records after the mid-2nd century, as if erased from memory. By the early 20th century, mining at Rosia Montana had slowed, but local excavators continued to find anomalies. In 1912, workers clearing a collapsed shaft uncovered fragments of what appeared to be an ancient plan etched on a thin sheet of gold alloy. The markings resembled technical diagrams, lines, measurements and angles, but the notation system was unlike Latin or Greek. It disappeared shortly after being sent to a private collection in Budapest. Copies of the drawing survive only in the form of blurred photographs taken before its removal, labelled simply Unknown Blueprint Fragment. Geologists studying the melted tunnels in recent years proposed a theory involving electrical discharge along mineral veins, caused by fault movements under extreme pressure. Yet the precision of the fused passages remains unaccounted for, as natural events would produce chaotic, uneven surfaces rather than smooth geometric forms. Furthermore, isotopic analysis of the surrounding rock revealed trace elements of metals not native to the Carpathian deposits, including tungsten and iridium, materials used in high-temperature industrial processes, but unknown in antiquity. The mine's oldest sectors are now sealed for safety, flooded by groundwater that seeps through collapsed galleries. Equipment often failed under unexplained magnetic interference, and in one instance, a tethered camera sent below captured a brief flicker of light before transmission ceased. When retrieved, the cable's metal casing showed faint scorch marks despite the icy water temperature. Today, Rosia Montana stands at the centre of debate between preservationists and industrial developers, seeking to reopen its veins of gold. Archaeologists warn that much of its underground heritage has yet to be understood, that its depths hold clues to ancient technology, or to a forgotten catastrophe that reshaped the mountain itself. Villagers still tell of nights when a low vibration rolls through the valley, rattling windows though the earth remains still, and of a faint glow seen in the forests above the sealed adits. No survey has yet determined where the melted tunnels truly end, or what lies within the uncharted voids that defy drilling and measurement. Some suspect the mountain hides a system built not for mining but for something far older, perhaps even predating Rome's arrival. At the core of the Carpathians, the blueprint no one can interpret remains sealed in darkness, engraved in stone like a lingering thought of its creators. The ghost miners of Butte. At night, the lights of Butte flicker against the black mouth of the mountain as if the town itself remembers who never came back. Locals still speak of the hill as though it breathes. Beneath homes and stores under the fading brick facades of the old copper boomtown, thousands of miles of shafts remain sealed. But sometimes, when the mist settles over the slopes, pale glimmers move within the dark. In the early years of the 20th century, Butte's mines fed the world's hunger for copper, and the earth below became a labyrinth of heat and dust. Shafts reached more than a mile down, and their drifts stretched outward like veins of a buried organism. By 1917, over 10,000 men worked underground, drawn by wages that few other towns could offer. It was also the year of the speculator mine disaster, when 168 miners suffocated after a fire trapped them beneath the hill, a tragedy so immense that it reshaped the town's identity forever. Yet among Butte's records lies mention of another catastrophe, one that seems to have vanished without a trace. Among the disaster lists that line Butte's archives, there is one gap where a tragedy should be. Old payroll ledgers mention a crew of 30 who went below for the night shift in 1910 and were never recorded as returning. The page following their names was torn clean from the logbook, and no newspaper ever reported their deaths. Company historians insist no such explosion occurred, yet miners in nearby shafts claimed they felt the tremor and heard the muffled roar from far below. Some said they smelled gas, others swore they heard the ringing of metal echoing through rock. But when rescue teams descended, they found nothing. No collapse, no debris, no human trace. Old miners spoke of lights that moved where no man could walk. Lanterns bobbed slowly through sealed galleries, helmet lamps appearing in mirror-like pools of groundwater and vanishing as soon as they were noticed. A handful of reports in local newspapers described voices drifting upward through ventilation shafts, low, rhythmic, like the sound of men calling out to one another across distance. The Butte Miner published a brief notice in 1922. Several witnesses observed flickering lights in the closed workings of the Leonard mine. Officials attributed the phenomenon to reflections from nearby homes, yet the witnesses had stood half a mile away from the nearest building, and the shafts in question were known to be completely sealed. When researchers descended in the 1980s to map the lower levels, their instruments reacted before their eyes adjusted to the dark. Compasses spun wildly in certain tunnels, and radio signals failed at exact depths. Thermal cameras picked up heat traces that resembled moving figures in sealed corridors, though the air was barely above freezing. One engineer wrote that the tunnels felt alive, resonating faintly, as if machinery deep within the rock was still running. Nothing in their footage offered a clear answer. In Butte, superstition was not a weakness, but a language of survival. Men who worked in silence spoke of the knockers, spirits said to warn miners of impending cave-ins. The line between practical caution and ritual was blurred. Those who ignored the old customs often met worse luck. After the unexplained disappearance, miners refused to work certain levels, claiming they heard shuffling steps beyond the rock walls. Supervisors dismissed it as fear after the speculated disaster, but even foremen avoided scheduling night shifts in those sectors. Decades later, a ledger from 1910 surfaced in the county archives, its pages warped by damp and time. On one entry, beneath a list of workers' names, a faint red mark appeared next to a single note. Cage failed to return. The handwriting was hurried, the ink faded, but the date matched the missing crew. The archivist who found it claimed that when the page was held under light, faint impressions of letters appeared beneath. The word gas repeated several times, followed by what might have been a sequence of numbers. The ledger was stored for preservation, but the markings have since darkened to illegibility. Today, most of the entrances are locked behind iron gates, yet the mountain still murmurs. The Barkley Pit, now a toxic lake formed from the collapse of open-pit mining, reflects the sky with an oily shimmer, and on still nights it's said the surface ripples without wind. Workers maintaining pumps to prevent overflow report hearing tapping from deep beneath the water, slow and deliberate, like the sound of a hammer against rock. They say it doesn't feel like an earthquake, but like something shifting below. Perhaps what remains below Butte is not spirit but memory, repeating itself in darkness. Those sounds were etched into the walls, absorbed by the veins of copper and quartz that still run beneath the town. Now and then, when temperature and air pressure align, the earth exhales those sounds again. Whether it is an echo of life or something beyond it, no one can say. Sometimes, when the wind moves through the hills, the town swears it can still hear the elevator cage returning with no one inside. The salt tunnels of Wieliczka. Silence settles differently in the salt mines of Wieliczka, as if sound itself were preserved beneath layers of crystal. The air hangs dense with mineral scent, and each droplet of brine that falls from the ceiling echoes like the heartbeat of the earth. Light refracts through translucent walls, illuminating corridors that seem eternal, suspended between centuries. Few places on the planet feel so ancient and awake at once, alive not with motion but with memory. Centuries of record keepers traced the mine's history to the 13th century, though the tunnels seem far older than any document describes. Wieliczka became a pillar of the Polish crown, its salt so valuable it was called white gold. Monarchs guarded its operations, engineers mapped its levels, and generations of miners descended into its depths. Yet among these verifiable facts lingers a legend, the tale of St. Kinga, a Hungarian princess who cast her engagement ring into a salt mine before her marriage to the Polish king. When miners later struck salt, they found her ring glimmering inside the first block they unearthed. The story remains beloved across Poland, but even beyond its mythic charm, it gestures toward the mine's deeper enigma, how far back the workings of Wieliczka truly reach. Deep within levels closed to tourists, explorers found halls carved with precision beyond medieval tools, their ceilings patterned with intersecting arcs. These were not the rough chambers of exhausted labourers, but symmetrical galleries with walls smoothed to a sheen. Surveyors from the 20th century catalogued them, but could not identify their makers. No records align with their creation, and the cuts do not match the chisels known from any era of the mine's documented use. Some historians speculated that they were natural erosions formed by ancient brine, yet the alignment of these vaults follows no geological logic. It mirrors intention, not accident. The air inside Wieliczka does not age, humidity remains fixed, wood refuses to rot, and even whispers can be heard from chambers away. Scientific teams studying the environment discovered a perfect equilibrium: 20 degrees Celsius, 75% humidity, and constant pressure that resists decay. Wooden supports from the 16th century still stand intact, their surfaces faintly dusted with salt. The effect is more than preservation. It is as though time itself stalls underground. And with that stillness comes an acoustic phenomenon few can explain. Voices and footsteps drift through layers of stone as if carried by memory rather than air. Among the chapels carved by miners' hands there are others of uncertain origin. Faces smooth as glass, eyes hollow, tools absent. The most famous, the Chapel of St. Kinga, dazzles with chandeliers, reliefs and sculptures crafted entirely from salt. Each figure gleams under electric light like frozen water. Yet beyond the tourist paths, in forgotten galleries, stand lesser-known carvings, statues that depict no saint, no known ruler or miner. Their proportions are subtly wrong, their hands larger than their arms, their postures unfamiliar. Conservators note that their polish differs from known artisans' work, as if they were shaped not by hammer but by heat. Geologists studying the mine note that its salt crystals bend light in peculiar ways, scattering it into motion even where no flame burns. This optical trick, caused by the extreme purity of the halite, creates the illusion of movement along the walls, flickers that mimic the swing of lamps or passing figures. Instruments have also recorded weak electromagnetic fluctuations, perhaps from trapped pyrite veins that interfere with compasses. For miners accustomed to total darkness, such distortions could manifest as fleeting apparitions, reflections mistaken for souls. Yet these explanations falter against the sheer persistence of the phenomenon, reported in the same chambers for centuries. Old miners kept diaries of their years below, and several described the same sound, a slow, deliberate tapping far from any active drift. One entry from 1785 mentions a pattern like 3 blows followed by a pause, always repeating from a sealed corridor. Another, dated 1832, warns new workers not to whistle near the lower chapels, claiming the echoes answer back in chorus. Even engineers of the Austro-Hungarian period noted strange vibrations detected by primitive seismographs, though no natural tremors were recorded above ground. The mine's reputation as a sacred space deepened. Locals said the dead continued their labour below, shaping salt in the afterlife. Salt remembers every touch, every echo. It preserves not just form, but intent. Every chisel mark, every print of a miner's hand lingers in its surface as though absorbed into the crystal. Archaeologists analysing layers of halite found traces of candle soot, sealed within microscopic fissures, evidence of centuries of human presence fossilised grain by grain. To study Wieliczka is to study endurance, of substance, of memory, and perhaps of consciousness. The mine's perfection of preservation suggests a place where history does not fade but accumulates unending. When the ground trembles there, the locals say it isn't collapse or gas, it's the mountain remembering the design it was forced to forget. Sections inspected in the 1990s revealed carvings that were not there in prior surveys, tiny geometric shapes pressed into the salt like stamps. Officials dismissed them as modern graffiti or mineral expansion, but the lines form coherent grids, as if traced with design. Sensors placed nearby later captured faint vibrations unlinked to machinery or earthquakes. Whatever moves beneath the surface, it works in silence, shaping patterns too subtle to see until the next century reveals them. Even the walls, carved by faith and fear alike, seem to guard an unfinished secret. The collapsing echo of Coober Pedy. Under the South Australian sun, Coober Pedy lies in a silence so vast it seems to hum. The desert stretches outward in every direction, a plain of crushed stone and pale dust, where the horizon quivers like molten glass. Daytime temperatures rise beyond endurance, and even the wind feels scorched as it drifts over the empty landscape. There are no trees to break the heat, no shade to soften its weight. Yet below this shimmering wasteland, the ground is alive with tunnels, miles of passageways carved by human persistence and the glint of opal that once lured thousands beneath the surface. To survive the desert, the town itself moved below, carving homes and churches into the same earth that once yielded opal. Here, nearly half the residents live underground in what they call dugouts, cool chambers where the temperature remains steady at 22 degrees while the sun burns above at 45. Corridors wind from living rooms into kitchens, then deeper into chapels where candles flicker against rough walls still streaked with mineral veins. For a century, Coober Pedy has been sustained by this dual existence, life beneath the desert floor and silence above it. But in that silence, something once began to stir. In the mines, walls shimmer with veins of opal that flash and vanish like passing light. The colours, green, violet, amber, shift with each movement of a miner's lamp, never repeating the same pattern twice. Beneath that beauty lies fragility. The sandstone and clay surrounding the opal are soft, prone to collapse without warning. Miners work alone, guided by instinct and the faintest gleam of colour in the rock. Many never find enough to recover their costs, others strike veins worth fortunes. But every miner knows the danger of sound. A single misplaced strike, a tremor of vibration can bring the ceiling down. The first reports of the echo came after a collapse near the old-timers' mine, when the shafts began to crumble without warning. According to the town's archive, the incident occurred sometime in the 1940s, though official records are sparse. 3 men escaped, one with broken ribs, another nearly buried. When rescuers returned the following day, they heard the steady rhythm of picks still striking from within the collapsed section. Believing survivors were trapped, they called for silence, and the sound continued. 3 beats, a pause, then 3 again. They dug toward it, but the tunnel was empty. The vibration carried no source. Even after the tunnels were sealed, the sound persisted. Slow, steady, unmistakably human. Residents living in nearby dugouts claimed to hear it late at night, a hollow tapping beneath the floor that travelled in patterns. A miner named Bill Jeffries told a local paper in 1952 that it followed him from one claim to the next. "It's like someone's down there, finishing the shift," he said. The local constable investigated twice. Finding no open shafts, the sound stopped only at dawn, fading not into silence but into the faint hiss of the desert wind above. Experts attributed the echoes to shifting stone and trapped air, but the rhythm carried purpose, not chaos. Geologists noted that opal-bearing rock amplifies vibration more than typical sandstone. Cracks can produce ringing tones as pressure releases unevenly, yet no measurement could explain how the sound repeated itself at exact intervals, or why it seemed to move from one sealed tunnel to another. Some engineers suggested barometric fluctuations between collapsed chambers created resonance, essentially the earth breathing, but even that would fade within hours. In Coober Pedy, the strike lasted for days. Among miners, the echoes became a warning, a sign that something older than man was stirring beneath the desert. The town's oral history still holds fragments of Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, accounts of ancestral beings who shaped the land through song and movement, leaving their rhythms embedded in the rock. Some miners, both indigenous and European, began to say the earth itself was remembering. The sound was not a haunting but a continuation of work, the desert finishing what men had begun. Others called it the ghost shift, believing lost miners carried on digging for the colour that had consumed their lives. In later years, researchers lowered sensors into abandoned shafts, capturing vibrations that moved as though following a path. In 1974, a small team from the University of Adelaide recorded low-frequency pulses travelling along collapsed tunnels with a precision that resembled footsteps rather than seismic tremors. Attempts to replicate the phenomenon failed. The next day, the sensors registered nothing. Some miners blamed the tests for disturbing the silence, claiming the desert didn't like being listened to. Others, more practical, warned that so many old shafts lay hidden that the ground itself was collapsing inward, slowly and invisibly, and that every echo was a prelude to another fall. Today, many of those shafts lie sealed, yet the desert still trembles faintly when the wind is still. Explorers who venture beyond the marked claims describe sudden temperature drops, as if the air below opens up without warning. sand trickles through unseen cracks, forming spirals that vanish before they touch the floor. The town above endures, its cafes, its opal shops, its quiet streets, but every so often, a resident reports hearing the same sound again. 3 strikes, a pause, 3 more, from nowhere. No one investigates anymore. They simply listen, then return to the stillness, as though the desert itself was speaking in code. The sand above lies still, but deep within, the rhythm of vanished hands continues to strike the earth in perfect time. The black shaft of Sudbury. The ground around Sudbury was never ordinary. It was forged in the violence of a meteor's descent. Nearly 2 billion years ago, a cosmic body struck the region with such force that it melted bedrock, scattering nickel and copper in liquid form across what would become the Sudbury Basin. Even now, the circular scars remain visible from orbit. A vast depression almost 60 kilometers wide, its edges hardened by ancient fire. To those who work beneath it, the land feels less like soil and more like the crust of something once incandescent, something that never entirely cooled. As the basin filled with machinery and noise, the industry learned to follow the fracture lines left by the impact itself. Mines like Creighton, Coleman and Lovett traced the paths of pressure and molten flow that still shape Sudbury's terrain. By the early 20th century, the city had become one of the world's major sources of nickel, the metal that armoured ships, powered batteries and shielded satellites. Its skyline, crowned with smelter stacks, rose from ground that still hummed faintly with magnetism. To miners, the basin's rock was both livelihood and labyrinth, a place where the laws of nature occasionally faltered. Of all the passages carved into Sudbury's depths, one never appeared on the maps, identified only by its code and its hue. The Black Shaft, as it was called by those assigned to it, extended beyond standard depth limits, reaching strata where heat and pressure warped even reinforced steel. Officially, it was a ventilation expansion, meant to relieve the strain on older drifts. Unofficially, it became the site of growing unease. Workers described tools vibrating without contact, radio static that mimicked human breathing, and a faint metallic ringing that lingered even after the equipment stopped. The first signal came not from the surface, but from a sudden distortion in the seismographs housed at Creighton. A minor tremor, the kind common to deep mining, registered at a frequency that didn't match the pattern of a rock burst. Within minutes, communication with the Black Shaft team ceased. Surface monitors detected a surge in magnetic flux, then silence. Rescue crews descended as far as the 7,000-foot level before they found the path blocked by a smooth, glassy obstruction. Melted rock fused into shape as though by extreme heat. No explosive detonation had been recorded, and no ignition source existed that could have caused such a transformation. Upon entering the lowest tunnels, engineers reported their sensors behaving erratically, the data fluctuating as though the walls themselves were moving. Heat signatures rose and fell irregularly, suggesting something deeper was emitting bursts of thermal energy. Compasses spun uncontrollably, and communication lines crackled with a distortion no filter could isolate. Later, when samples were brought to surface laboratories, analysts reported microscopic traces of unknown crystalline structures embedded within the nickel ore formations that appeared oriented, as if aligned to a magnetic field no longer present. The documentation of the collapse ends abruptly, a series of typewritten pages halted by a tear in the carbon copy. What remains in the archives of Ontario's Ministry of Northern Development is incomplete. Timestamps, crew lists, and safety check forms without signatures. Even the shaft's last inspection log is missing. A follow-up memo notes that continued instability in the Black Shaft region necessitates indefinite closure, yet no seismic data from that date survives. Requests for clarification were reportedly answered with a single line: excavation compromised by geomagnetic anomaly. Nothing further. Survivors later spoke of a sound that seemed to move through their walls, not echoing but pulsing as if alive. One described it as metal folding in slow motion, another as breathing stone. They claimed the light from their headlamps dimmed whenever the sound drew near, and that loose grains of ore shifted toward it, pulled by an invisible current. Psychologists attributed their accounts to sensory stress, a common affliction among deep mining crews. but recordings from the night of the collapse reveal low-frequency tones resonating well below human hearing, identical to those produced by the Earth's magnetic disturbances during solar storms, except no storm was recorded that day. Years later, physicists returned to the same depths, building laboratories where sunlight had never reached. The Sudbury Neutrino Observatory now occupies what was once part of Creighton Mine, its detectors shielded by rock that filters out cosmic interference. Here, scientists study particles that pass silently through the planet, remnants of the same cosmic forces that once shaped the basin. Some note that the observatory's sensors occasionally register inexplicable spikes, brief flashes of energy that originate not from above but from below. The readings are faint, irregular, and dismissed as electronic noise, yet they coincide with tremors that ripple through the old mining network. It may be that the silence of the basin is not void, but the Earth itself remembering the weight of what was taken from it. The black shaft remains sealed behind reinforced gates, its coordinates redacted in public records, but its presence endures like a flaw in the bedrock's memory. Above it, Sudbury continues to live from the minerals drawn from the same ancient wound, unaware that one of its deepest chambers may have reached something that predated the planet itself. The black shaft of Sudbury endures behind its barriers, yet the ground above it still trembles, as though something beneath refuses to rest. The golden void of Serra Pelada. Noise never left Serra Pelada. It rolled across the open pit in waves, as if the earth itself were breathing through the dust. From the rim, the mine looked less like a man-made wound and more like a living organism, thousands of figures moving in rhythm, the air vibrating with shouts, clattering metal, and the low hum of shifting ground. Even the wind seemed to pulse with the same exhausted heartbeat. For those who laboured there, sound replaced silence, and gold became not a metal but a fever. It started with a farmer's shovel striking glittering dust in the clay of Para, and within days the hills were alive with rumour. In 1980, Genesio Ferreira da Silva's accidental discovery drew the first prospectors. By year's end, the rural quiet of northern Brazil had become a vortex of motion. The government, unprepared for what followed, watched as more than 100,000 men poured into the jungle. They came from distant states and forgotten villages, lured by whispers that gold lay just beneath the soil, so pure it could be lifted with bare hands. Within months, the earth of Serra Pelada became one of the most densely populated points on the continent, a human hive built on clay. From every direction they came, tens of thousands of men descended barefoot into the pit, their movements merging into one relentless body. They carried sacks of ore up fragile ladders slick with rain, the chains of human labour stretching endlessly from rim to floor. Photographs taken by Sebastião Salgado captured the scale. Men the size of ants, framed against cliffs of ochre and grey, each face fixed in the same expression of exhaustion and belief. No machines dared enter the pit, only muscle, rope and will. To climb was to survive the day. To descend was to trust the ground not to give way. The pit refused to hold its shape. Each storm carved new ravines, each tremor erased a day's labour. The walls bled water and clay, pouring into the valley below until the floor vanished beneath slides of wet red mud. Some nights miners awoke to the sound of entire slopes collapsing, the air filled with a roar that silenced every voice. Those who returned in daylight found their ladders twisted, their shovels half buried, and the earth rearranged, as though the mine had dreamed in their absence. The land was never still, never stable, and never satisfied. Those who stood close described a sudden softening underfoot, as if the earth had exhaled, and then nothing but air where men had stood. Witnesses swore they saw the ground ripple like liquid, shimmering with a faint golden sheen before folding in on itself. No outcry, no debris, no bodies. Others claimed to have seen the reflection of the sky shimmer below the surface, as though a mirror had formed beneath the mud. For every collapse that could be explained, some defied all reason. No search uncovered traces of those lost. The ground appeared untouched, its surface smooth, unbroken and waiting. Studies of the soil revealed layers of compressed clay and trapped gases, yet none could explain the precision of the circular sinkholes that appeared after each collapse. Geologists spoke of hydrological pressure, methane pockets, or simple instability, but the geometry was too exact, the pattern too deliberate. Instruments detected magnetic variations moments before each event, brief surges that distorted compasses and scrambled radio signals. The soil itself contained unusually high concentrations of iron oxide, amplifying the effect. Yet what puzzled researchers most was how swiftly the ground sealed afterward, leaving no stratigraphic evidence of rupture, no transition between earth removed and earth restored. When the military arrived, the pit was no longer a mine but a wound, and those sent to guard it avoided the edge as though it might open again. The government, under pressure to prevent further deaths, placed the region under the control of Vale and closed access to independent miners. Helicopters hovered above what had become a monument to human delirium, a pit half a kilometre wide, 200 metres deep, its walls streaked with rust and rain. For years after, soldiers posted there refused to sleep near the rim, reporting tremors that made their tents quiver. Officially, the closures were for safety. Unofficially, the state wanted the noise to stop. Now the pit lies quiet beneath a stagnant lake, its surface broken only by the shimmer of rain and the memory of what it consumed. Local villagers call it Lago da Morte, the Lake of Death, and claim that the water never clears, no matter the season. Some nights, they say, the surface glows faintly gold as if something luminous turns beneath it. Geological teams who returned decades later found metallic readings inconsistent with the soil's composition, suggesting the presence of dense material deep below. Yet no core sampling was permitted, and the instruments were withdrawn after sensors malfunctioned repeatedly. What gleamed in the dark may not have been gold, but the earth reflecting human desire, dazzling, endless, and cruel. Serra Pelada was both altar and abyss, a place where greed turned physical and the land itself answered. What began as a dream of fortune became a mirror of humanity's oldest hunger, to take no matter the cost, and to believe that the earth will not notice. But it was noticed. No current stirs the water now, yet the depths remain awake, remembering those who thought silence meant the end. The Vanished Ladder of Iwami Ginzan. The disappearance was first noted in ink, not stone, recorded in an Edo-era inspection ledger that never raised its voice beyond formality. The document, dated to the early 18th century, described an incident at the Ryugen shaft of the Iwami Ginzan mine. It mentioned 6 names, a date, and a simple note. The ladder could not be found. For centuries, the entry lay unnoticed in the Tokugawa archives, a footnote among routine mining reports. Yet when historians later cross-referenced it with other documents from the same month, they discovered a silence far heavier than the ink implied. 3 separate records missing from the sequence, all referring to the same shaft, all torn or blotted at the same line. Iwami Ginzan's tunnels once carved wealth from silence, their silver fueling an empire that measured value by the ounce and the breath of miners below. Located in the mountains of Shiman Prefecture, the mine operated for nearly 400 years, its veins of argentite supplying coinage and trade from Kyoto to the Portuguese coast. The surrounding settlements, Omori and Unotsu, thrived on the labour that vanished beneath their soil. Within this network, the Ryugen shaft was known as one of the deepest and most structurally complex. Engineers of the day kept precise blueprints, tracking air vents and ladders descending into galleries lined with wooden scaffolding. Yet for all their detail, none account for the space where the ladder supposedly disappeared, a void that seems to exist only in recollection and omission. The Ryugen shaft was due for inspection that spring, and 6 men were chosen to ascend a wooden ladder reaching into a chamber no one had entered for years. The shift log recorded the time they began, the weight of the timber tools they carried, and the temperature within the shaft. Witnesses from the lower drift heard the creak of wood, the fall of dust, and then nothing. No sound of movement, no sign of collapse, no call for help. When the foreman sent another team up, they found the passage empty and the ladder gone, its hooks still set into the wall, but the space between them bare. The men were never recovered. The report, later sealed under administrative discretion, concluded that the structure was unstable and likely withdrawn for repairs. Yet no repairs were ever ordered and no replacement ladder was built. The shaft itself was sealed by decree within the year, marked as unsafe, its coordinates omitted from the subsequent maps of the mine. When preservationists reopened the sealed tunnel in the 1980s, the air inside was undisturbed, as though no breath had entered since the day the ladder disappeared. Conservationists expected decay, timber rot, or mineral growth. Instead, they found a cavity in the stone, perfectly symmetrical, lined with impressions in the shape of wood grain. The walls bore faint indentations that matched the rung spacing of Edo period ladders, preserved in solid rock as if carved by heat or pressure. Photographs taken under oblique light revealed another anomaly, a thin crystalline sheen, translucent and uniform, coating the chamber floor. Samples tested at the National Museum of Japanese History identified it as a form of halite fused with microparticles of silver, materials foreign to that depth. No tool marks surrounded the void. No geological process has fully explained its formation. Reports from the Geological Survey catalogued every measurable factor, yet each reading contradicted the next, as if the rock itself refused to be consistent. Magnetic field strength spiked irregularly, temperature fluctuated by fractions of a degree in perfectly sealed conditions, and a faint echo persisted no matter the source of sound. Researchers proposed hydrothermal mineralization, rapid crystallization under superheated brine, but the surrounding strata showed no trace of thermal damage. Others suggested the collapse of an internal cavity due to oxidation, but oxidation leaves residue, and none was found. A few of the preservationists noted something less tangible. When illuminated by handheld lamps, the wall impressions appeared to shimmer faintly, producing the illusion of motion, as if the ladder were still swaying gently in invisible air. In the local archives of Shimane, a monk from the early 19th century recorded visiting the sealed shaft and hearing the voices of 6 beneath the stones. He wrote that miners would leave offerings at the site, coins and salt to appease the spirits of those who walked without steps. Even during the 20th century, when the mine became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, staff and engineers reported a repeating sound near the Ryugen section, a soft wooden creak that began and ended without a source. Instruments left overnight occasionally registered minute shifts in air pressure, as if something unseen passed between the sealed chambers. Modern historians reviewing the case note the bureaucratic perfection of the records, the way every absence was methodically accounted for, every line of data completed except the one where the ladder should appear. The entry's precision makes the void more troubling. If the documents of Tokugawa Japan could track every ounce of silver mined, every man employed, every load extracted, how could a simple ladder and 6 trained miners vanish without any trace of correction or follow-up report? Yet the geological data from the reopened site contradicts both explanations. The imprint of the vanished ladder remains under preservation glass, a hollow pattern where movement once was, a record of weight without form. The museum's internal catalogue lists it under the neutral heading Silicified Impression, Unverified Origin. Those who have examined it closely describe the unnerving sensation of recognition, as though the eye perceives something still climbing through the stone. Carved into the mountain's veins, the memory of what vanished waits, stubborn against time. The cursed shaft of Banska Stiavnica. One miner's journal, penned in charcoal on rough paper, spoke of sounds that should not exist, a clatter and whir beneath the earth, long after his peers had fled. The entry, dated 1764, described how lanterns flickered without wind and the rhythmic strike of tools echoed along corridors no living hand occupied. The words are sparse, matter-of-fact in tone, yet they carry the weight of fear. The miner took care to note times, locations and measurements, as if precision could contain the inexplicable. Later scholars who examined these diaries noted consistency across multiple records. Every reference to the shaft hinted at mechanical activity when none should have been possible, and every report ended abruptly, as if the writers themselves feared the consequence of elaboration. Banska Stiavnica was more than a mine. It was a city of tunnels, where wooden aqueducts and underground wheels moved water with precision that defied the era's tools. Established in the 12th century, the mines were a cornerstone of the Kingdom of Hungary's wealth, producing silver and gold that shaped currency across Europe. Entire neighbourhoods developed atop the shafts, and the underground network extended for hundreds of kilometres. Engineers designed ingenious water systems, including artificial reservoirs and horse-powered water wheels, to power ore-lifting mechanisms in shafts too deep for manual labour. Among these was a corridor that would later earn the epithet cursed, both for its inexplicable phenomena and its capacity to unnervingly disrupt even the most disciplined mining operations. By the mid-1700s, miners spoke cautiously of one shaft whose name they whispered only in fear, claiming hammers struck stone without hands and lamps danced in empty corridors. Diaries recorded nights when experienced workers refused to descend, leaving only the youngest or most desperate to carry out inspections. Some noted drafts that appeared to come from nowhere, while others wrote of fleeting glimmers of reflected light along walls deep enough to be beyond natural illumination. Although superstition undoubtedly shaped interpretation, these observations were repeated with striking similarity across decades, suggesting that even seasoned miners, accustomed to the mine's regular creaks and groans, encountered something genuinely anomalous. The cursed shaft descended straight for nearly 250 metres, its walls lined with oak supports that groaned under both the weight of rock and the echo of human labour. Horizontal timber braces threaded the shaft at measured intervals, maintaining stability in sections where rock strata were uneven. Ventilation channels carved into the stone allowed air to move with predictable patterns, yet in this corridor sudden gusts sometimes reversed direction, carrying faint clattering sounds downward or swirling lamplight upward. Even the floor's stone slabs, intended to prevent mud accumulation, occasionally shifted overnight, leaving indentations that suggested movement, though no human or animal had passed. These structural anomalies lent credibility to reports of the shaft's strange behaviour, blurring the line between physical cause and perceived phenomenon. Engineers inspecting the drift catalogued every irregularity: pulleys that spun without touch, drafts that shifted unpredictably, and timbers whose resonance did not match their size. Diaries and official reports from the 18th century meticulously described wheel mechanisms that creaked and turned with no applied force, yet no machinery had been left running. Water levels in adjacent channels fluctuated erratically, producing splashes and gurgles that seemed to originate in sealed compartments. Each observation was measured and annotated, yet investigators repeatedly concluded that the anomalies could not be fully explained by conventional mining theory. The precision and consistency of the accounts suggest that something within the shaft itself amplified ordinary occurrences into something unaccountable. Miners refused to linger in the corridor, leaving only the bravest or the most desperate to descend, where shadows seemed to move independently of their lanterns. Some accounts describe the subtle sensation of being watched, others the persistent hum of machinery heard behind closed doors. Anecdotes survive of workers who descended alone, only to return pale and silent, not explaining their unease. Folklore intertwined with fact. Some claimed the shaft carried the spirits of miners long gone, but all agreed on one detail: the corridor resisted prolonged human occupation, and every attempt to map or alter it met with setbacks, from minor collapses to unexplained machinery malfunctions. Modern surveys of the shaft confirm echoes and airflow patterns that confound intuition, yet the precise origin of certain repeated knocks and lights remains unaccounted for. Acoustic studies demonstrate that even small impacts can reverberate for extraordinary distances in their geometry, yet measurements of pressure and motion fail to reproduce the regularity recorded in historic diaries. Geologists note unusual mineral deposits along the walls that might produce faint, intermittent glimmers when illuminated, but the alignment of these reflections does not correspond to natural angles. Magnetic readings in the shaft fluctuate beyond expected geological variation, leaving instruments momentarily confused. While these data points provide a partial understanding, they also reinforce the sense that the mine preserves a logic of its own, one partially inaccessible to human measurement. The cursed shaft endures as a testament to both human ingenuity and the persistent strangeness of subterranean life, where metal, wood, and water conspire beyond comprehension. Miners and engineers alike have sought to reconcile natural forces with superstition, yet neither fully explains the phenomena observed over centuries. The corridor has been mapped, reinforced and monitored, but access remains restricted, its interior catalogued as a historical curiosity rather than a fully understood space. It is a reminder that even in the heart of deliberate engineering, the Earth may conceal a presence that resists control, leaving each echo, flicker and movement unresolved. Deep underground, Banska retains the pulse of unseen labour, repeating endlessly without human touch. The frozen chamber of Norilsk. The permafrost stretches beyond sight, a silent expanse where the horizon is indistinguishable from the sky, and even the wind seems reluctant to move. Ice ridges glitter faintly under the low Arctic sun, reflecting a light that seems both present and unreal. In this frozen emptiness, every sound carries for kilometers, yet human voices disappear almost immediately, swallowed by cold and distance. It is a landscape designed to test endurance and perception, a place where machinery groans in ways that sound like living things, and where the earth itself seems to resist intrusion. Beneath this austere terrain, the region's mines dig relentlessly into rock and ice, extracting metals that fuel modern industry while hiding secrets beneath layers of frozen stone. Norilsk had been extracting nickel and palladium for decades, drilling deep into rock and ice, with equipment designed to endure temperatures that froze oil and seized hydraulics. The city's mining infrastructure included a labyrinth of open pits, shafts and boreholes, reaching hundreds of meters into the permafrost, connected by insulated tunnels to protect workers from the bitter cold. Soviet-era operations had mechanized much of the labor, but even the most sophisticated rigs struggled with the Arctic extremes, forcing engineers to innovate constantly. The scale of extraction was immense. Enormous volumes of ore moved daily, processed on site under conditions that would immobilize most machinery elsewhere. Yet even in this meticulously controlled environment, anomalies would arise, and one borehole would come to defy every expectation of science and reason. When engineers lowered the instruments into borehole 47, readings flattened unexpectedly, as though a cavern opened beneath the ice, perfectly formed yet empty. Sonar scans indicated a void several meters in diameter, circular and symmetrical, its walls unnervingly smooth compared with the surrounding rock. Thermal sensors detected no temperature variation, no trace of human presence or heat, and attempts to map the chamber produced inconsistent echoes that suggested both depth and a near impossible uniformity. The instruments, calibrated for precision under the harshest conditions, returned data that made experienced geologists pause. Every measurement indicated a hollow where none should exist, a void seemingly carved into permafrost and stone with impossible intent. The crew descended slowly, ropes and sensors tracking every movement, but when the final check returned, all signals had ceased, leaving only a silent void. The team consisted of 6 highly trained Arctic miners and geologists, each outfitted with thermal suits, oxygen, and redundant communication equipment. They reported standard progress at each interval, yet midway through the operation, the instruments signaled nothing, and radio communication went dead. Surface crews heard no alarms, no crash, no disturbance in the borehole's winches. When engineers attempted recovery, they found the shaft intact, ice and rock undisturbed, and no trace of personnel. Logbooks noted only the time of disappearance, a final set of numbers denoting depth, and a single chilling remark: no human remains found. Even the permafrost refused to behave as expected, shifting imperceptibly, maintaining voids where ice should have filled every crevice, and registering magnetic readings that did not align with local geology. Scientists returned repeatedly, attempting to account for anomalies through known physical processes: sub-zero contraction, ice expansion, and ancient glacial layering. Borehole measurements showed minor tremors, insignificant on the Richter scale but precisely synchronized with the disappearance. Gas sensors recorded occasional spikes of inert argon and methane, yet these could not account for a void of such perfect geometry. Every probe suggested some unknown factor, whether natural or otherwise, was preserving a space that should not exist, challenging assumptions about the stability of Arctic mining environments. Repeated sonar sweeps confirmed the chamber's geometry, perfectly circular and smooth, while thermal probes detected neither human heat nor any trace of the missing instruments. Engineers experimented with drill cores and advanced radar mapping, yet each method produced images that only reinforced the anomaly's symmetry. Even light and sound behaved oddly. Acoustic pulses travelled unpredictably through the void, producing faint echoes that seemed slightly out of phase with their origin. The uniformity of the chamber, combined with the absence of disturbance, baffled both geologists and technicians. Attempts to simulate the void with controlled ice removal failed, reinforcing the sense that the formation was not entirely a product of known physical processes. Workers whispered of a place where time seemed suspended, where a chamber swallowed men without a trace, and even the rational mind struggled to reconcile measurement with disappearance. Diaries from long-term Arctic mining personnel describe unease among teams assigned to Borehole 47, the sensation of being watched, instruments failing inexplicably, and occasional sounds that did not correspond to mechanical or environmental sources. Stories passed between crews in hushed tones, warning of a frozen cavity that might remember or absorb those who entered. Though superstition shaped some interpretations, the consistency of accounts across decades suggested something persistent in the permafrost itself, resisting both explanation and human interference. The permafrost holds the chamber intact, a frozen enigma beneath layers of rock and ice, as if the mountain itself resists revealing what occurred within. Expeditions continue to monitor Borehole 47, employing radar, thermal imaging and acoustic testing, but none have successfully mapped the full extent of the void. The combination of Arctic extremes and unexplained geometry has turned it into a locus of study and speculation, where empirical science and the unknown converge. Researchers, engineers, and miners alike confront the limits of observation, recognizing that beneath the frozen landscape lies a mystery unyielding to measurement or human understanding. The frozen silence of the Arctic hides a void complete and untouched, keeping all who disappeared unrecorded. The Lost Tunnel beneath Johannesburg. Water pooled silently in the shaft, its surface black and still, reflecting the hollow stone walls above, as if the light itself feared to linger. The air smelled of damp earth and metal, a combination that hinted at both centuries of human labour and something untouched by time. Surveyors moving carefully along the edge noted the sharp, clear acoustics of dripping water echoing from distant tunnels. Every footstep seemed amplified, swallowed and returned as an echo of itself, and even the smallest tool scraped along stone with an exaggerated resonance. The scene was eerie not only for its silence but for the way the shaft seemed to preserve the moment itself, as if the centuries of mining above had yet to disturb the stillness below. Beneath the city, shafts tunneled deep into the Witwatersrand, Rand, veins of gold threading through rock layers mapped with meticulous care by engineers and prospectors alike. Johannesburg's gold rush had transformed the area into one of the most productive mining regions in the world, drawing prospectors from across the globe and generating a complex network of underground workings. Mining techniques evolved rapidly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with timbered supports, mechanical hoists, and early electrical equipment becoming standard in the deeper shafts. The rock strata themselves were studied rigorously, revealing sediment layers rich with minerals yet notoriously difficult to navigate without careful surveying. The city above had grown oblivious to the labyrinth below, yet the tunnels remained, layered one atop another, holding fragments of forgotten labour and unexplained spaces that would sometimes surprise even experienced engineers. When a long-abandoned shaft was cleared for inspection in the 1960s, surveyors discovered a tunnel that had eluded maps, leading directly to an underground lake whose stillness seemed unnatural. The water's depth was difficult to gauge, reflecting light without ripples and giving the illusion of a black mirror rather than a pool. Measuring rods sank only partially before encountering unknown resistance, as though something beneath the surface defied traditional observation. The surveyors exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that neither municipal records nor mining archives referenced this tunnel. Its discovery was accidental, a result of routine safety checks rather than intentional exploration, yet it immediately demanded scrutiny because of its anomalous features and the eerie perfection of its preserved state. At the water's edge rested a cart unlike any catalogued in South African mining records, its metal unmarked by rust and its wood impervious to decay, as though it had been crafted from an unknown alloy. Wheels aligned perfectly with the narrow rails, showing no trace of wear, and the axles bore no lubrication marks, yet they appeared operational. The craftsmanship suggested care and purpose, yet no records indicated who might have built it, or for what precise task. Engineers speculated that its resistance to decay might be attributed to mineral-saturated air and consistent humidity, yet even among other artifacts in similar environments, nothing matched this level of preservation. The cart seemed almost suspended in time, a reminder that not all human ingenuity conforms to historical documentation. The tunnel stretched over 100 metres, reinforced with timber and rock in patterns consistent with 19th century engineering, yet subtle anomalies suggested intervention beyond known techniques. The walls were cut with precise straight lines, and occasional niches were carved into the stone to hold lamps or tools. Airflow followed patterns slightly inconsistent with the tunnel's incline, producing occasional breezes that made lantern flames flicker unnaturally. In some sections, the rock itself seemed polished, as though water had passed through for decades, yet no channels existed to explain the smoothness. Even the timber supports, while conventional in construction, bore slight markings that did not match any known carpentry method used in the region during the gold rush. Explorers reported the faintest tremors beneath their boots, whispers of movement carried across the lake's surface, and a chill that seemed to emanate from the stone itself rather than the air. Sounds reflected oddly within the space. A tap on the cart produced multiple echoes, each delayed at slightly different intervals, suggesting irregularities in the chamber's dimensions. At times, surveyors swore they glimpsed shadows where none should exist, fleeting images at the edge of vision that vanished when directly observed. Although these phenomena might have been psychological effects induced by the enclosed, unfamiliar environment, the consistency of multiple observers' reports suggested that the tunnel had qualities not entirely attributable to perception alone. Archival searches revealed no mention of the tunnel in municipal or mining records, leaving historians and engineers to speculate whether it had been deliberately hidden or simply lost to time. Johannesburg's gold mining history is vast, with thousands of shafts mapped and documented, yet this corridor had escaped both notation and memory. Some hypothesized it could have been used for smuggling, illicit storage, or experimental mining tests, while others posited that it was an older vein predating formal records. The absence of documentation only deepened the mystery, raising questions about how such a functional, preserved space could survive unnoticed beneath one of the world's most thoroughly surveyed mining regions. In Johannesburg's subterranean depths, what humans abandon continues to exist, revealing its secrets only when circumstance demands it. The tunnel remains a place where engineers can apply decades of mining experience yet encounter the limits of knowledge, where water, stone, and metal combine to resist both explanation and casual interference. Every examination yields new measurements, yet the ultimate origin and purpose of the underground lake and its untouched cart continue to defy resolution. It is a reminder that beneath urban expansion, beneath layers of streets and buildings, human history and natural geology can intersect in ways that leave lasting questions rather than answers. Underneath the city's foundations, the forgotten tunnel endures, quietly harbouring mysteries beyond any map. The return of the 27th miner. The timber doors of the Benham shaft creaked open, and a solitary figure stepped into the sunlight, as if no time had passed at all. Dust swirled around him, catching in the rays of mid-morning light, yet he moved with deliberate calm, his body unshaken by what should have been decades spent underground. Those nearby froze, unsure whether to approach or retreat, the air thick with disbelief. The stillness of the surrounding hills seemed to respond to the apparition, holding its breath as the man's shadow stretched across the worn wooden platform, long untouched since the night of the disappearance. He wore the same soot-darkened coveralls listed in the last night shift log, boots caked in earth that should have long eroded, and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of endless hours below. His hands were calloused, but the skin bore no signs of advanced age, no marks of decay from years lost to the mine. Even the tools strapped to his belt appeared freshly maintained, yet they were identical to those recorded in the company inventory from that fateful night. There was an uncanny steadiness to his posture, as though the world above had shifted while he remained perfectly stationary, immune to the passage of time that had inevitably touched everyone else. Miners stepped back, mouths open, while foremen and medical staff struggled to reconcile the man before them, with the 27 officially lost beneath the mountain. Families emerged from surrounding homes, drawn by the commotion, faces etched with both hope and skepticism. Doctors moved quickly to assess his condition, measuring pulse, respiration and reflexes, but found nothing unusual save for the apparent stasis of age. Investigators demanded identification, cross-referencing logs and photographs, but each detail, the uniform, the tools, even the pattern of dirt on his boots, aligned perfectly with the records from the night shift so many years ago. The records still showed 27 men descending into the shaft that night, their names checked and accounted for, but the return entries were conspicuously blank, leaving only the sealed timber above. The night shift log ended abruptly with the cage's descent, each worker followed by a simple check mark. Safety inspections had confirmed the shaft remained sealed following an unrecorded incident, and no official accident report ever explained the men's disappearance. Coal mining in early 20th century Kentucky was meticulous in documentation, yet here, one shaft defied the procedural order that governed every other operation. Years of investigation had yielded no trace of the miners, only speculation, grief, and the silent void below. He spoke quietly, words precise and unwavering, insisting that the others remained below, moving through tunnels that no human eye had seen since that fateful night. According to his account, the 26 had continued their work, unaware of the passage of years, their movements measured and silent, as if the mountain itself dictated the rhythm of labour. He described corridors of coal and stone, unfamiliar even to seasoned engineers, illuminated by a pale glow he claimed emanated from the walls themselves. The details were consistent down to tools and techniques, and yet unverifiable by any physical evidence or contemporary map. Engineers confirmed the shaft's dimensions, noting that no side chambers large enough to hold even half the crew had ever existed, and yet the man's account remained consistent and detailed. Blueprints, survey records, and subsequent excavations showed nothing beyond the known vertical and horizontal drifts, yet the miner's description suggested an entirely concealed network. Structural anomalies that should have caused collapses appeared stable, as though the tunnels had been reinforced by forces unknown. Even geologists struggled to reconcile the continuity of his narrative with the impossibility of space beneath the sealed shaft. Communities surrounding Benham whispered of curses and lost time, blending grief with fear, and newspapers documented speculation alongside official denials. Generations of families had grown up hearing the tale of the vanished miners, but now the story had shifted from myth to direct testimony. Miners hesitated to enter the shaft again, their faith in reason tempered by fear, while journalists chronicled every utterance from the returned man, dissecting his story for inconsistencies that never appeared. Townspeople debated whether the man was a miracle, a hallucination, or a messenger from a space untouched by ordinary chronology. The mountains seemed to breathe beneath the doors, a reminder that some spaces hold human life in ways that elude measurement and defy reason. The Benham shaft, once a site of tragedy and speculation, had become a liminal threshold between the known and the unknowable. Scholars, engineers, and residents alike faced the unsettling reality that time, space, and human presence might not follow the conventions they had long relied upon. The shaft held its secrets with quiet authority, and the returned miner's words offered both a glimpse and a profound warning. Some work in the depths continues beyond the reach of the world above, and in the shadow of the sealed shaft, the 26 others remain, somewhere beyond the reach of clocks and memory. The shimmering vein of Naica. When miners first breached the cavity in 2000, their lamps caught something that no chart or expectation had predicted: a crystalline labyrinth stretching beyond known boundaries. What had begun as a routine excavation for lead, silver, and zinc veins suddenly became a doorway into a subterranean world unlike any other. The miners hesitated at the threshold, their work interrupted not by technical difficulty, but by the sheer impossibility of what lay ahead. Walls and ceilings lined with massive selenite crystals, some towering over 40 feet, extending in every direction as if the mountain had grown them overnight. Naica had long yielded metals that shaped regional economies, yet the discovery of this chamber revealed a hydrothermal secret that had lain dormant for centuries. Situated deep within Chihuahua, the mine's veins had been carefully mapped since the early 20th century. But no previous excavation had penetrated the fissures that created these natural cathedrals of selenite. Scientists quickly recognized that the crystal formations were far older than the mine itself, their genesis traced to slow hydrothermal processes under stable temperatures over thousands of years. Geologists lowered sensors and instruments into the cavity, recording heat, humidity, and mineral composition with meticulous care. The readings were immediately alarming. Temperatures soared to nearly 50 degrees Celsius, while relative humidity hovered close to 100%. Any prolonged exposure without protective suits could result in heat stroke or worse. Instruments themselves struggled under the conditions, wires warped, batteries drained, and metal corroded at accelerated rates. Workers quickly realized the peril inherent in their discovery. Each step became a careful negotiation between movement and survival. A sweat poured freely, and the heavy air pressed against chests like a solid weight. The slightest exertion sent miners gasping, and many retreated after only minutes of exploration. Specialized cooling suits were developed to prolong their time within the cavern, yet even these could not fully counter the oppressive conditions. Some selenite formations towered from floor to ceiling, perfect prisms of translucent crystal, whose surfaces caught and refracted the miners' lamps into blinding brilliance. Laser surveying confirmed the extraordinary scale, documenting lengths of 40 feet or more, with clarity and smoothness that defied expectation. Even veteran mineralogists expressed astonishment at the uniformity of growth, noting that no known geological mechanism could so precisely orient crystal structures on such a massive scale. Reflections within the crystals scattered light in complex fractal-like patterns, creating illusions of movement along walls and ceilings. Shadows danced unpredictably, and even stationary lamps produced shifting shapes across the translucent surfaces. Scientists observed how light split and refracted inside the mineral lattices, producing colours and motion that seemed almost animate. Navigating the crystalline corridors required both caution and attention, as the visual distortions occasionally concealed sharp protrusions or uneven ground. Several miners described subtle auditory and tactile anomalies, the echo of footsteps where none existed, whispers that seemed to emerge from the crystal itself, and a fleeting sense of being observed. Exhaustion and heat likely amplified these perceptions, yet the reports were consistent across multiple workers and different expeditions. Scientists noted the cavern's acoustic properties, recognizing that sound travels unusually far and reflects with distortion in the dense, smooth mineral surfaces. Standing among the crystalline giants, researchers could not ignore the humility imposed by the cavern's scale and precision. Human endeavor, from the extraction of ore to the mapping of passageways, seemed almost inconsequential compared to the geological patience that had shaped these formations over millennia. Every measurement, every photograph, only hinted at the immense timeframes involved, suggesting processes that proceeded independent of human understanding. The Naica cave became a space where observation alone inspired awe, a reminder of nature's capacity to construct monumental structures with unerring exactitude. Data collected over decades continues to puzzle geologists, leaving the cavern as both a laboratory and an enigma beyond total comprehension. The selenite crystals remain intact, preserved by the heat and mineral-rich environment, yet no model fully explains their size, clarity, or orientation. Research expeditions are strictly time-limited due to the extreme conditions, and each return from the cavern brings renewed questions rather than answers. The crystals endure beneath the desert, their silence absolute, as though time above must align with their own. The Mercury caverns of Almaden. Almaden's tunnels have echoed with labour for over 2 millennia, their air heavy with the metallic scent of mercury that poisoned yet sustained generations. Miners descended into narrow shafts, carrying lamps and tools, fully aware that each inhaled vapour could leave tremors in their hands or haze in their thoughts. The mine's reputation preceded every descent, a place where wealth and danger coexisted in equal measure, where the ground itself seemed to hum with the history of countless lives spent extracting the red metal that had fueled empires and alchemy alike. Every step was an exercise in caution, for the mountain preserved both its riches and its hazards with unwavering fidelity. Records traced the veins of Almaden back to pre-Roman Iberia, yet even Roman engineers marvelled at the depths and richness of the cinnabar-laden rock. Over centuries, the Spanish crown documented its economic significance, exporting mercury to the Americas to process silver and gold. Almaden became a node in a global network, where mineral wealth and human ingenuity intersected with danger, and where miners' labour shaped economies far beyond the mountains themselves. Legends of subterranean spirits circulated alongside official chronicles, hinting at the eerie awareness that locals attributed to the mine's enduring presence. Miners worked amid shimmering pools of liquid metal, aware that every inhaled vapour crept into their bodies, leaving tremors in their hands and whispers in their minds. The occupational toll was immense, yet labour persisted. Accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries describe workers staggering from the shafts, their skin grey with mercury exposure, yet returning day after day to extract the precious mineral. Protective measures were primitive at first, gradually evolving into rudimentary ventilation and wetting systems designed to minimise airborne mercury, though none could fully counter the effects of prolonged exposure. The human body endured, adapted, but never mastered the toxic embrace of Almaden. Some caverns widened into irregular basins, where pools of mercury reflected lamplight with mirror-like perfection, while jagged cinnabar veins scarred the walls. These spaces were both operational zones and enigmas, with natural formations shaped by hydrothermal processes, yet suggesting geometry that seemed deliberate, as if the mountain itself had arranged them for reasons unknown. Explorers and geologists noted the basin's unusual stability. Even centuries of mining had not displaced the liquid metal from its repose. Walking across narrow ledges beside these pools, miners felt the weight of both risk and awe pressing down upon them. Faded symbols and inscriptions cling to walls and ceilings, a deliberate record left by miners long dead whose meaning has vanished. Pre-Roman scripts mingle with Roman numerals and medieval glyphs, offering tantalizing glimpses into the minds of those who worked here before modern record-keeping. Some carvings appear ritualistic, others practical, yet none offer a complete explanation. Archaeologists remain intrigued by patterns suggesting ancient rites or cryptic messages, hinting that human curiosity and superstition thrived alongside economic necessity deep beneath the surface. Workers spoke of brief glimmers and reflections that seemed alive, of footsteps echoing where none should exist, and of instruments that occasionally malfunctioned without reason. Even today, miners report fleeting perceptions that defy straightforward explanation. A lamp swinging where no hand touched it, a distant tapping when no work is underway, a faint shimmer in a corner that disappears upon approach. While some attribute these anomalies to Mercury's reflective surfaces and acoustic oddities, others insist there is an intelligence embedded in the mine, observing and responding in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Chemists studying the mine note that some mercury pools remain unnaturally undisturbed over decades, defying evaporation rates expected in such temperatures. The mineral's density and the microclimate combine to create stability rarely observed in other mines. Certain fissures produce a faint constant hum when instruments are inserted, while chemical analyses reveal traces of unusual alloys and mineral compositions whose origin remains unclear. Despite centuries of study, the Almaden caverns retain secrets hidden within their liquid veins and mineral walls, challenging the boundaries of both geology and metallurgy. For thousands of years, men have threaded through these veins, their toil leaving faint echoes, yet the mine endures, unyielding and indifferent to human span. Each era left artifacts, inscriptions, and modified chambers, yet the overarching structure of the caverns remains shaped by natural forces far older than any human endeavour. The continuity of labour contrasts starkly with the permanence of the environment, emphasising the precariousness of human effort against the slow, deliberate processes of the earth. Visitors and researchers alike are struck by the juxtaposition of fragility and endurance, a pattern repeated across centuries of extraction and observation. Pools of mercury catch faint light in forgotten caverns, while symbols carved long ago keep their secrets from any who enters. Researchers continue to document, measure and theorise, yet the Almaden caverns withhold their full story, a labyrinth of metal, stone and memory that exists in the intersection of human ambition and natural precision. Each expedition uncovers new anomalies, fleeting reflections, or inscriptions that deepen rather than diminish the mystery, ensuring that the mine's legacy is both material and enigmatic. Echoes of work and vanished lives linger in the stone, holding truths the living have yet to grasp.